30 retired military dogs were losing their minds inside a crowded auction warehouse on the Charleston waterfront. Security guards were shouting. Handlers were struggling to keep control. Wealthy contractors, retired officers, and corporate executives stood frozen as barking echoed across the concrete building. Nobody could calm the dogs. Then a woman wearing faded blue hospital scrubs walked through the side entrance. She looked exhausted, like someone who had just finished a 12-hour shift and barely had enough energy left to stand. She wasn't a dog trainer. She wasn't military police. She wasn't part of the auction. She was a 32-year-old emergency room nurse named Serenity Brooks. And within seconds, the noise stopped. Not gradually, not one dog at a time. All at once, the entire warehouse fell silent. Because Serenity had just looked across the room at a scarred Belgian Malinois wearing a muzzle and a red behavioral warning tag. A dog everyone had been told was dangerous. A dog nobody wanted to get close to. A dog named Duke. Then she said his name. And what happened next left every person in that building speechless. The retired ward dog broke free from his handler and ran straight toward her. Security reached for their radios. People screamed. Several buyers stepped backward. Everyone expected an attack. Instead, Duke stopped inches from Serenity, sat down, and gently pressed his head into her hand. As though 6 years had never passed. As though he had been waiting for her all along. But this is not just the story of a forgotten military dog. Because the moment Duke recognized Serenity, something much bigger began to unravel. A powerful businessman suddenly became desperate. Anonymous complaints started appearing. Threatening messages followed. And a simple dog auction would soon expose secrets connected to millions of dollars, political influence, and people willing to destroy anyone who got in their way. The question was no longer why Duke remembered Serenity. The real question was why so many powerful people were terrified of a nurse who only wanted to take a retired war dog home. And the rain hung over Charleston Harbor like a gray curtain, softening the cranes, the cargo ships, and the rusted warehouse roofs into shadows. The wind smelled of salt, diesel, and something old that refused to be forgotten. Serenity Brooks drove with both hands on the steering wheel, though the road ahead was nearly empty. The wipers dragged across the windshield in tired strokes, clearing the rain just long enough for the world to appear, then blur again. She was 32 years old, but that morning she felt much older, as if every sleepless night she had worked at St. Matthew Medical Center had settled behind her eyes and carved itself into the quiet lines around her mouth. She was not the kind of woman strangers remembered because she demanded attention. Serenity had a calm, almost invisible strength about her. She stood 5'7", lean from years of long shifts and missed meals, with warm brown skin, dark hair usually tied into a practical knot at the back of her head, and steady hazel eyes that seemed to study pain without flinching from it. In the emergency room, people trusted her before they understood why. Maybe it was her voice, low and controlled even when chaos split open around her. Maybe it was the way her hands moved, careful and certain, as if fear was something she acknowledged but never obeyed. That morning, she was still wearing the faded blue scrub top she had worked in all night. There was a small stain of coffee near the hem. One sleeve had been pushed up higher than the other, and her shoes looked like they had survived a small war of their own. In a way, they had. So had she. The warehouse district near the harbor was not a place Serenity usually visited unless an ambulance brought someone from a shipyard accident or a drunk tourist discovered gravity near a loading dock. The buildings were wide, low, and practical, with metal siding, chain-link fences, and signs warning people away in language that sounded polite only because lawyers had written it. On that particular morning, one building had been rented by a company called Southern Sentinel Asset Recovery, though the white banner hanging above the entrance tried to make the event sound cleaner than it was. Specialized Security Asset Auction, it read. Serenity had stared at those words for a long time when she first saw the listing online. Asset. That was what they called them. Not dogs. Not veterans. Not living creatures who had crossed deserts, searched ruined houses, slept beside soldiers, and carried the memories of explosions in their bones. Assets. 3 weeks earlier, Serenity had been sitting in the small break room at St. Matthew Medical Center at 3:17 in the morning, eating peanut butter crackers from a vending machine because she had forgotten to pack dinner again. St. Matthew was a large hospital near downtown Charleston, known for its trauma unit and its ability to look expensive in the lobby, while every nurse upstairs knew exactly which supply cabinet stuck when opened. Serenity had worked there for 4 years. Before that, she had been a combat medic attached to a joint medical support unit overseas, though she did not volunteer that information often. Her patients did not need her history. They needed her steady hands, her quick judgment, and her ability to notice the small things, the unusual breathing pattern, the change in skin color, the silence of a patient too exhausted to complain. That night, while another nurse named Mia Patel tried to fix the ancient coffee machine with the rage of a woman betrayed by technology, Serenity opened a veterans forum she still checked out of habit. Mia, a petite Indian-American nurse in her late 20s with round glasses, quick humor, and a habit of calling hospital equipment possessed furniture, had glanced over and said, "You know doom scrolling after midnight is medically bad for your soul, right?" Serenity had smiled faintly, but had not answered. Then she saw the photograph. The image was grainy, taken through chain link under hard fluorescent light. A Belgian Malinois sat inside a temporary kennel, muzzled, broad-chested, and still in a way that made the air around him feel tense. He was older now. His muzzle had silver around the edges. A scar ran near his left ear and disappeared down toward his jaw, partly hidden beneath the dark fawn fur. One ear tilted slightly differently than the other, as though cartilage had healed after an injury and never quite forgiven the world for it. His eyes were pale amber, sharp and watchful, not wild, not empty, but deeply tired. Beneath the photo, the caption listed him as male Belgian Malinois, approximately 9 years old, former military working dog, advanced handler required. The post said he would be sold at auction in Charleston Harbor along with 29 other retired military and contract K9s. Serenity had stopped breathing for 3 full seconds. Duke. The name did not appear in the listing, but she knew him before memory finished opening the door. She knew the angle of his shoulders. She knew the way he held his weight forward, as if the ground beneath him might vanish at any moment. She knew the old suspicion in his eyes, the same expression he had worn whenever a new lieutenant tried to give instructions with too much confidence and not enough experience. 6 years had passed, but Duke still sat like a soldier waiting for orders from someone worthy of giving them. Serenity had touched the screen with 2 fingers before she realized she had moved. Mia had stopped arguing with the coffee machine and turned. "Serenity?" she had asked. Serenity closed the forum, then opened it again, as if the photograph might change if she looked twice. It did not. Duke was still there, behind chain link, wearing a muzzle like a criminal. In Afghanistan, Duke had belonged to a handler named Caleb Ross, a tall, broad-shouldered Marine with sandy blonde hair, a crooked nose broken twice, and a laugh so loud it seemed personally designed to irritate officers. Caleb had been the kind of man who could make people laugh in places where laughter felt almost illegal. He had called Duke, "Your Majesty," whenever the dog refused to acknowledge bad commands from anyone else. Duke had been younger then, all muscle and speed, with a black mask across his face and a way of moving that made him seem less like an animal and more like a shadow given teeth. He was not affectionate in the simple way family dogs were affectionate. He did not wag his tail at strangers or beg for treats. His loyalty had been precise, almost sacred. Once given, it did not scatter easily. Serenity had earned it slowly over months of casualty runs, sleepless nights, and one terrible afternoon when dust, smoke, and shouting swallowed the road outside a small village whose name she still could not say without feeling the old heat in her chest. She had not seen Duke after Caleb died. That was not a memory Serenity invited often, but some memories did not wait to be invited. They came like storms over flat land. She remembered Caleb being carried toward her on a stretcher, remembered Duke fighting against a lead until 2 soldiers held him back, remembered the sound he made when he realized the man he loved was not getting up. Not barking, not howling, something lower, something that seemed pulled out of the earth itself. Serenity had worked on Caleb because that was what her hands knew how to do, even when her heart had already understood what her mind refused to accept. Afterward, Duke had sat beside the empty stretcher, his body trembling with a discipline that looked almost human and therefore somehow worse. 2 weeks later, Serenity had been reassigned. 3 months later, she was home. 6 years later, She was in a hospital break room in Charleston staring at a photograph of a dog the system had misplaced like paperwork. From that night on, Serenity began counting money. She had $2,860 in savings, most of it built one extra shift at a time. She added every weekend bonus, every holiday differential, every overtime hour she could take without collapsing. She skipped the new tires her car probably deserved. She canceled the small trip to Asheville she had promised herself and pretended she was not disappointed. She ate cheap soup, repaired her old running shoes with glue, and ignored the ache in her lower back after 12-hour shifts. By the morning of the auction, she had $4,930. It was not enough for a house, not enough for a new life, not enough to fix a broken system. But she hoped it might be enough for one dog. The parking lot outside the warehouse was nearly full when she arrived. Black SUVs gleamed in the rain. Men in expensive tactical jackets stood in clusters, speaking with the relaxed arrogance of people who had never worried whether their debit card would approve at a gas station. Some looked like retired military, quiet-eyed and broad in the shoulders, wearing old unit caps and weathered faces. Others looked like private security executives, built in gyms and polished in boardrooms. Serenity parked her aging silver Honda between a lifted pickup and a glossy Range Rover. For a moment, she sat with the engine off and listened to the rain tapping on the roof. Her reflection stared back from the dark windshield. Tired eyes, damp hair, hospital scrubs, no makeup, no armor except stubbornness. She almost laughed. It would have been easier if courage looked more impressive. In stories, courage wore shining armor or rode white horses. In real life, apparently, courage showed up in worn sneakers with a hospital badge still clipped to its pocket. Inside, the warehouse smelled of wet concrete, disinfectant, old metal, and animal stress. The sound hit her next. Barking, whining, claws scraping against crate floors, handlers giving low corrections that did not help. Temporary chain-link panels divided the space into two sections. On one side stood rows of folding chairs and a raised platform for the auctioneer. On the other side, beneath long fluorescent lights, were the dogs. 30 retired K9s waited in crates or on short leads. Most were Belgian Malinois and German Shepherds, with a few Dutch Shepherds whose narrow faces and bright eyes gave them the look of creatures who had heard every human excuse and believed none of them. Some had gray muzzles. Some had old scars. Several wore colored tags marked with warnings: high drive, advanced handler, behavioral review, not recommended for family placement. Serenity read those tags and felt anger move through her quietly, not hot and explosive, but cold enough to keep. At the registration table sat a woman in a charcoal blazer who looked as if smiling were part of her job description, but not part of her personality. Her name tag read Elaine Porter. Elaine appeared to be in her early 40s, with pale skin, sleek auburn hair cut just below her jaw, and thin lips pressed into a professional line. She had the kind of posture that suggested she had spent years making unpleasant policies sound reasonable. When Serenity gave her name, Elaine glanced at the scrubs, then at the modest bidder's deposit receipt in Serenity's hand. "You understand all sales are final," Elaine said. Her voice was smooth, practiced, and empty of curiosity. "All animals are transferred under liability acknowledgement. Behavioral history is provided when available." Serenity heard the careful phrase, "when available." She signed the forms. "I understand." Elaine handed her a bidder paddle with the number 42 printed in black. "Please remain behind the marked barriers unless accompanied by authorized personnel." Serenity took the paddle. Of course, it was not a lie exactly. It was what she intended at the time. She found Duke in the far row. For a moment, the entire warehouse seemed to pull away from her. He was in a reinforced crate near the corner, larger than she remembered but thinner beneath the coat, his ribs not visible but suggested by the way his body carried itself. A heavy rubber muzzle circled his jaw. His fur was fawn and black with silver beginning along the snout, and the old scar near his ear was worse than the photograph had shown. It crossed down toward his cheek like a pale seam, the kind left by metal, teeth, or shrapnel. His left eye had a small cloudiness near the edge, not enough to blind him, but enough to show time had not passed gently. A red tag hung from the crate. "Dangerous, handler aggression, do not approach." Duke was not barking. He was not pacing. He sat perfectly still, amber eyes moving from person to person, measuring distance, exits, hands, threat. He looked like a king who had survived betrayal and expected another. Serenity wanted to go to him. Every part of her wanted it so badly her chest hurt. But she did not. Dogs like Duke did not need emotion thrown at them across a crowded room. They needed safety. They needed time. They needed someone to understand that love, when offered too loudly, could feel like another kind of demand. So she stood at a distance and let him see her only if he chose to look. For several seconds, he did not. Then his head shifted almost imperceptibly. His eyes passed over her, moved on, then returned. Serenity felt the old world open beneath her feet. Duke stared. His ears came forward, one slightly uneven. He did not rise. He did not make a sound. But his breathing changed. Serenity knew because she had watched him breathe beside stretchers, inside aircraft, under canvas tents while mortars sounded in the distance. She held herself still. "Hi, Duke," she whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "I came as soon as I found you." The auction began at 10 o'clock. The auctioneer was a thin man named Preston Vale, around 50, with a narrow face, silver hair combed back too carefully, and the quick tongue of someone who could sell umbrellas in a drought. His suit was dark blue, his shoes bright brown, and his smile moved faster than his conscience. He welcomed the room, thanked Southern Sentinel Asset Recovery, and spoke about working dogs transitioning into specialized private sector roles. Serenity sat near the back because she wanted to see the room. She had learned long ago that the people who mattered were not always the ones speaking. Preston moved through the first lots quickly. Younger dogs drew immediate interest. Prices climbed in neat, brutal increments. 5,000, 7,000, 10,000. A German shepherd with a missing tooth and one cloudy. I went to a rural security firm. A nervous Malinois with a yellow tag went to a man who smelled of cologne from 6 feet away. Each sale landed in Serenity's stomach like a stone. Near the front sat Victor Kane. Serenity noticed him before she knew his name because other people gave him space. Victor was in his late 40s, tall and powerfully built, with iron gray hair cut close to his scalp, a square jaw shadowed by perfectly trimmed stubble, and dark eyes that did not wander. They selected. His suit was charcoal, expensive but plain, chosen by a man who understood that true wealth did not need decoration. He wore no wedding ring. A faint scar ran through his right eyebrow, giving his face a permanent suggestion of old violence. When he smiled at people, it was brief and strategic. Victor Kane owned Kane Protective Solutions, a private security company with contracts across the Southeast, including municipal buildings, ports, and private estates where rich people feared the world they had helped create. Men greeted him with careful respect. Women at the registration table straightened when he passed. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Power, Serenity thought, was often just volume someone else had learned to supply for you. During a short break, Victor approached the coffee table where Serenity stood with a paper cup she had not tasted. Up close, he seemed even larger, not merely in body but in the way he occupied the air. His eyes dropped briefly to her badge, then to her bidder number. "Serenity Brooks," he said, as if reading her name from a file rather than a badge. "Emergency nurse at St. Matthew." Serenity did not like that he had looked her up, but she did not show it. "That's right." His smile appeared and disappeared. Interesting crowd for a hospital nurse. Dogs need nurses too, apparently. His mouth twitched, almost amused. "You're here for the red tag Malinois." Serenity said nothing. Victor leaned slightly closer, not enough to threaten, only enough to remind her he was accustomed to being heard. "That animal is not a rescue project. He is a liability. Dogs like him require facilities, insurance, handlers, structure. Sentiment won't rehabilitate him." Serenity looked at him then, really looked. "And what will?" Victor's eyes hardened by a fraction. Usefulness. The word chilled her more than any insult could have. To him, Duke's value depended on what could still be taken from him. Serenity thought of Caleb's laugh, Duke's muzzle pressed against a dead man's sleeve, and every old dog in that warehouse still waiting for someone to remember they had once been more than equipment. "That's a sad little religion," she said softly. Victor stared at her. Then he laughed once, low and humorless. "Don't bid with your heart, Nurse Brooks. It makes people careless." Duke's lot came up at 11:35. Preston Vale adjusted his note card as two handlers brought Duke forward. One handler was young, maybe 25, with a shaved head, nervous hands, and the anxious posture of someone pretending not to be afraid. His name patch read Miller. The other handler, older and heavier, kept a shock pole clipped to his belt, though he did not hold it. Duke walked between them with the leash tight, but his body controlled. His head was level. His eyes moved once across the room and found Serenity. This time, she knew he saw her. His ears flicked forward. The young handler felt the change and tightened the lead too sharply. Duke did not react, but Serenity's fingers curled around the bitter paddle until the edge bit her palm. Lot 17, Preston announced. Belgian Malinois, male, approximately 9 years old. Former military working dog with multiple overseas deployments. Advanced handler required. Behavioral review indicates aggression toward inexperienced handlers and poor suitability for standard domestic placement. Starting bid, $3,000. Serenity raised her paddle. So did Victor Kane. So did 3 others. The number climbed quickly. 3,500. 4,000. 4,500. Serenity stayed in as long as she could. Her pulse beat in her throat, but her face remained still. She had $4,930. She could maybe stretch to $5,000 if she delayed rent and made certain choices she did not want to examine too closely. At $5,500, one bidder dropped out. At $6,000, another. Victor barely moved when he bid. He lifted 2 fingers, and Preston obeyed like a priest receiving a sign from heaven. 7,000. Serenity's paddle stayed down. Her hand felt strangely empty without the hope of raising it. She watched the number move beyond her reach and felt the familiar humiliation of being poor in a room where money wore clean shoes and called itself wisdom. At 8,000, only Victor remained. Preston scanned the room theatrically, though everyone knew the contest was over. 8,000 once. 8,000 twice. Serenity looked at Duke. Duke looked back at her. The warehouse noise faded until she could hear only rain ticking against the metal roof. Sold, Preston said, striking the block. Lot 17 to Mr. Victor Kane. Something inside Serenity did not break. Breaking would have been dramatic, and she had never been given the luxury of drama. Instead, something sank. Quietly. Heavily. Like a ship going under without fire or music. Around her, the auction moved on. Papers changed hands. Victor spoke to Elaine Porter near the side table. The young handler Miller led Duke away toward the holding area, walking too fast, pulling too hard. Duke's head lowered slightly. Not in defeat exactly, but in that awful disciplined way working dogs had when they had learned that resisting the wrong human only made things worse. Serenity stood. She did not decide to. Not fully. Her body simply understood before her mind caught up. She stepped out from the row of chairs and moved along the edge of the auction floor. No one noticed at first. Why would they? She was just a tired nurse in faded scrubs, one more person with too little money and too much feeling. She passed the coffee table, the registration desk, the sign marked "Authorized Personnel Only," and the simple rope barrier separating buyers from the handling corridor. For half a second, she stopped there. Rules had shaped most of her adult life. Medical protocols, military procedure, hospital policy, chain of command. Rules saved lives when used rightly. But Serenity had also seen rules become curtains people hid behind while something living suffered on the other side. Duke was 10 yards away. Miller was dragging him toward a side gate. Victor Kane had his back turned, signing documents as if the matter were finished. Serenity stepped over the rope. "Ma'am." Elaine Porter's voice cut through the room. "Ma'am, you cannot enter that area." Serenity kept walking. Miller turned, saw her, and panicked. He jerked the leash. Duke stopped. His head came up. The warehouse seemed to inhale. Serenity saw the exact moment recognition moved through him, not simple memory, not excitement, but something deeper and older. A bridge thrown across 6 years of loss. Duke's body changed. His weight shifted forward. His ears came up. His trembling began so subtly no one else seemed to notice. "Stop her," Victor Kane said. 2 security guards moved from near the wall. One was a broad man with a shaved head and a black polo stretched tight across his chest. The other was younger, narrow-faced, uncertain, his hand already reaching toward his radio. Serenity heard them. She heard Elaine repeating policy language behind her. She heard Preston Vale trying to regain control from the stage. But all of it became distant, as if the warehouse had sunk underwater and left only Duke clear. "Duke," she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The young handler lost the leash. For one terrifying second, the entire warehouse saw exactly what it expected to see: a muzzled, red-tagged, scarred Belgian Malinois breaking free in a room full of civilians. People shouted. A chair scraped backward. Someone cursed. The broad security guard reached for something at his belt. Victor Kane turned, his face no longer smooth, no longer amused. Duke ran straight towards Serenity across the concrete floor, all muscle and memory, his nails striking sparks of sound from the ground. Serenity did not move away. Her heart slammed once, hard enough to hurt, but her feet stayed planted. She saw not the red tag, not the muzzle, not the warning printed by people who had never earned his trust. She saw the dog who had stood beside wounded soldiers. The dog who had refused to leave Caleb's stretcher. The dog who had carried grief with the discipline of a warrior and the confusion of a child. 4 feet from her, Duke stopped. Not crashed. Not skidded. Stopped. The silence that followed was so complete the rain on the roof sounded enormous. Duke stood before her, chest rising and falling behind the muzzle, amber eyes locked on her face. Serenity slowly lowered one hand. Palm open, fingers relaxed. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the same quiet command she used in trauma rooms when panic tried to become contagious. "Easy, Duke." The dog sat. A sound moved through the warehouse, not quite a gasp, not quite a prayer. Serenity felt her throat tighten. Duke leaned forward and pressed his muzzled face against her palm, gently, carefully, as if some part of him feared she might vanish if he pushed too hard. Serenity closed her fingers over the side of his face and felt the old scar beneath his fur. She wanted to say 100 things. "I'm sorry. I looked for you. I should have found you sooner. Caleb would have hated this. You are not an asset. You are not forgotten." But none of those words came. Instead, she bowed her head just slightly and whispered, "I know, boy. I know." Behind her, Victor Kane's voice cut through the silence like a knife drawn slowly from a sheath. "Remove her from this floor." The security guard stepped closer, but slower now. Everyone in the warehouse had seen Duke choose her. Everyone had seen a dangerous dog become still at the sound of one woman's voice. Serenity did not turn around. Duke remained seated before her, his body pressed close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the damp air. The auction had ended for Victor Kane on paper, but something else had begun in that room, something no contract had planned for and no amount of money could quietly erase. Serenity Brooks had come to Charleston Harbor hoping to buy back a forgotten war dog. She had lost the auction, but as Duke sat at her feet and the entire warehouse stared in stunned silence, it became clear that Duke had not been waiting to be bought. He had been waiting for several long seconds. Nobody moved. The warehouse that had been filled with barking dogs, bidding voices, and the constant metallic hum of fluorescent lights suddenly felt frozen in place. 30 retired military dogs watched from their kennels. Security guards stood halfway through reaching for their radios. Buyers stared openly. Even the auctioneer, Preston Vale, seemed to have forgotten how to speak. At the center of it all stood Serenity Brooks and Duke. The Belgian Malinois remained seated directly in front of her, his massive body perfectly still despite the tension vibrating through the room. His amber eyes never left her face. The muzzle covered most of his expression, but Serenity knew him too well to miss what was happening. Recognition. Not confusion. Not excitement. Recognition. 6 years had disappeared in an instant. Serenity slowly ran her fingers along the side of his neck where the fur had grown unevenly over old scar tissue. Duke closed his eyes briefly. The gesture lasted less than a second, but everyone saw it. A dangerous dog didn't do that. A dog suffering from uncontrollable aggression didn't do that. A dog who had supposedly become unstable didn't place himself calmly at the feet of a woman he had not seen in 6 years. The story the paperwork told and the story standing before them were clearly not the same. "Get her away from that animal." Victor Kane's voice cut through the silence. The security guards exchanged uncertain glances. Nobody moved. Victor's jaw tightened. He wasn't accustomed to being ignored. For nearly 20 years, he had built Kane Protective Solutions into one of the largest private security contractors in the southeastern United States. Men obeyed him because contracts depended on him. Politicians returned his phone calls. City managers shook his hand. Companies trusted him with multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects. Yet at that moment, standing inside a warehouse full of retired military dogs, none of that seemed to matter. The problem was simple. Everyone had seen what happened, and nobody wanted to be the person who started a fight between a decorated military K-9 and the woman he clearly trusted. Serenity finally stood. Duke immediately stood with her. Not behind her, not ahead of her, beside her, exactly where military training had taught him to position himself near a trusted handler. A murmur spread through the crowd. Several retired veterans exchanged looks. They understood what they were seeing. One older man near the back folded his arms and watched carefully. He had remained silent throughout the auction. Now he stepped forward. The movement was subtle, but people instinctively made room for him. He appeared to be somewhere in his early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered despite his age. His silver hair was cut short in military fashion. Deep lines marked the corners of his eyes. A thin white scar ran from beneath his left ear toward his collarbone, disappearing beneath a weathered gray jacket. His name was Harrison Reed. Most people in the room didn't recognize him immediately. The few who did became noticeably quieter. Harrison had spent nearly 3 decades in Special Operations Command before retiring as a colonel. He was not famous to the public. Among military circles, however, his reputation carried weight. Men who had served under him described him as calm, relentless, and almost impossible to intimidate. Years of combat deployments had stripped away any interest in unnecessary drama. He listened carefully, observed patiently, and when he finally spoke, people tended to pay attention. Harrison stopped several feet from Serenity and Duke. His blue-gray eyes moved between them. Then he looked directly at Duke. Something softened briefly in his expression. "You remember her," he said quietly. Duke's ears lifted. The colonel nodded once, as though receiving confirmation. Victor Kane stepped forward. "Colonel Reed." His tone remained polite, but barely. "This is a private transaction." Harrison looked at him. "I can see that. The dog belongs to me." "Does he?" Victor's eyes narrowed. The question had been delivered casually, yet somehow it felt dangerous. The auction concluded. "Maybe." Victor folded his arms. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Harrison replied calmly, "that I've spent the last 40 minutes watching a supposedly dangerous military working dog display more discipline than most people in this building." A few buyers chuckled. Victor didn't. Harrison continued. "And now I'm curious." "About what?" "The paperwork." The room became very quiet again. Serenity noticed something change. Not in Victor, in the people around him. Several employees from Southern Sentinel Asset Recovery suddenly looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. Harrison noticed too. His eyes missed very little. "You have concerns about the documentation?" Victor asked. "I have questions." "Such as?" Harrison glanced toward Duke, then back toward Victor. "When was his last behavioral evaluation performed?" Victor hesitated. "Only briefly, but long enough. I don't have those records memorized." "No," Harrison agreed. "You don't." The silence stretched. Harrison turned toward the auction staff. "I'd like to see the transfer file." The request wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive, yet it landed with surprising weight. The auction manager exchanged an uneasy look with Elaine Porter. Neither spoke. Victor's expression hardened. "You have no authority here." Harrison smiled faintly. "You're correct." The smile disappeared. But authority and influence are different things. That was true. Everyone present knew it. The warehouse suddenly felt much smaller. Serenity remained silent. Years of emergency medicine had taught her something important. When experienced people were uncovering information, the smartest thing to do was stay out of their way. Harrison extended a hand toward the auction manager. "The file." Reluctantly, the manager disappeared into a temporary office constructed from portable walls. 5 minutes later, he returned carrying a thick folder. Harrison accepted it. Then he began reading. The warehouse waited. Several buyers quietly resumed their seats. Others stayed where they were. Nobody wanted to leave now. Something unusual was happening. Harrison flipped through page after page. His expression remained neutral. Then his eyebrows lifted. Just slightly. The reaction lasted less than a second. But Serenity noticed. So did Victor. A few pages later it happened again. This time Harrison stopped reading entirely. He looked down, then back up, then down once more. as if verifying something he couldn't quite believe. Victor took a step forward. What is it? Harrison ignored him. He continued turning pages, then finally closed the folder. The sound echoed loudly in the warehouse. What happened to the Georgia records? Nobody answered. Harrison looked around the room. The rehabilitation facility in Georgia. Still silence. The transfer history skips 11 months. Victor spoke first. I'm sure it's a clerical error. No. Harrison's voice remained calm. It isn't. He reopened the folder. There should be 3 separate custodial reviews during that period. Another page turned. There are none. Page. No behavioral assessments. Page. No veterinary evaluations. Page. No handler transition reports. Page. No insurance documentation. He closed the file again. Nothing. The atmosphere changed instantly. Even people with no military background could tell this wasn't normal. Military working dogs generated paperwork for everything. Medical visits, training sessions, housing transfers, behavioral reviews. Entire careers could be reconstructed from documentation alone. An 11-month gap was almost impossible. Victor crossed his arms. So what? Several heads turned. Even he seemed to realize how bad that sounded. Harrison stared at him. So what? Victor said nothing. Harrison's eyes became colder. That dog served overseas. He pointed toward Duke. Men died protecting him. His voice remained quiet. Others risked their lives because he helped protect them. The colonel took a slow breath. And now almost a year of his history has disappeared. Nobody interrupted. Not even Victor. Harrison turned another page. His expression changed again. This time there was no hiding it. Surprise. Then concern. Then something very close to anger. What is it? Serenity asked. Harrison looked at her. Then at Duke. The old dog remained pressed against her side. Waiting. Trusting. The colonel opened the folder to a specific document. His behavioral designation. What about it? It doesn't match. Serenity frowned. What do you mean? Harrison tapped the page. The report classifying him as handler aggressive. He flipped backward, then forward, then backward again. His finger stopped. The evaluating veterinarian never signed it. A chill moved through the room. Victor immediately spoke. That proves nothing. No. Harrison agreed. It proves someone forgot to finish falsifying it. Nobody laughed. The statement wasn't intended as a joke. And suddenly, for the first time that day, Victor Kane looked genuinely worried. Because this had stopped being about a dog auction. This had become a question. A very dangerous question. Who had altered Duke's records? And why? Harrison slowly closed the folder. Then looked directly at Serenity. How badly do you want this dog? The question surprised her. She glanced down at Duke. At the scar near his ear. At the years visible in his face. At everything he had survived. More than I can afford, she answered honestly. For the first time all day, Harrison smiled. A real smile. Small. Tired. But genuine. Good. Serenity blinked. What does that mean? The colonel looked toward Victor Kane. Then toward the auction staff. Then back at her. It means, he said quietly, this auction may not be over yet. And across the warehouse floor, Victor Kane suddenly looked like a man realizing he had just stepped into a fight he never expected to have. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Harrison Reed's final statement. The warehouse felt different now. The atmosphere had shifted from an auction to an investigation. Victor Kane understood it immediately. For years he had built a career around controlling rooms. He knew how power moved through people. He knew how conversations could be redirected, how pressure could be applied, how doubts could be buried beneath confidence. At that moment, however, he could feel control slipping. Not dramatically, quietly, which was far more dangerous. Harrison Reed remained standing with Duke's file tucked beneath one arm. The retired colonel seemed entirely comfortable with the silence. Men like Harrison had spent decades in places where speaking too quickly could get people killed. The auction manager finally cleared his throat. If there are concerns regarding the documentation, we can review the matter internally. No, Harrison replied. The manager blinked. No. The word landed like a hammer. Harrison's eyes moved toward the temporary office. I've spent 30 years reviewing military records. He tapped the folder. And I don't believe this file. The room grew quieter. Victor Kane stepped forward. What exactly are you accusing my company of? Harrison turned slowly toward him. Nothing. Victor relaxed slightly. Then Harrison continued. Yet. The relaxation disappeared. Serenity watched everything carefully. Years in emergency medicine had taught her to read tension the same way other people read weather. Victor Kane wasn't angry anymore. Anger was simple. This was calculation. The kind that happened when someone was trying to determine how much danger they were actually facing. Duke remained pressed against Serenity's left leg. The old Malinois had not taken his eyes off Victor once. Not once. Serenity noticed. So did Harrison. Interesting, the colonel thought. Very interesting. Dogs remembered things humans missed. They remembered voices, sense, fear, threats, trust. Duke clearly disliked Victor Kane. That alone didn't prove anything. But it added another question to a growing pile of them. Let's make this simple, Victor finally said. His voice remained controlled. Professional. Dangerously calm. You found incomplete paperwork. Correct. That doesn't invalidate ownership. No. Victor spread his hands. Then we're finished. No. Again. The same answer. The same infuriating calm. Several people nearby exchanged glances. Victor's jaw tightened. Harrison opened the folder once more. There are federal guidelines regarding retired military working dogs. Victor said nothing. There are procedures. Still silence. There are chain of custody requirements. Victor's eyes narrowed. And there are circumstances under which a transfer may be temporarily suspended pending review. The warehouse manager visibly paled. Now they understood where this was going. A suspension. If Harrison succeeded in triggering one, Victor wouldn't own Duke. Not yet. Possibly not ever. The auction manager swallowed. Colonel Reed, are you formally requesting a review? I am. The manager looked miserable. Victor looked murderous. Serenity looked confused. Harrison noticed. It's all right, he told her. She frowned. It doesn't feel all right. For the first time that afternoon, Harrison laughed softly. No, it never does. He closed the file again. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Several people expected him to produce identification. Instead, he removed a worn leather notebook. The notebook looked ancient. The corners were rounded. The cover carried scratches accumulated over many years. Inside were phone numbers. Old-school phone numbers. Written in actual ink. Harrison flipped through several pages. Then stopped. Victor's stomach dropped. Because he suddenly realized Harrison wasn't bluffing. The colonel wasn't making a scene. He wasn't negotiating. He was preparing to call someone. The wrong someone. Colonel. Harrison raised a hand. Victor stopped talking. Not because he wanted to. Because somehow he felt compelled to. The retired officer dialed a number. The call connected after 2 rings. Harrison Reed. Pause. Yes. Another pause. I'm standing inside Southern Sentinel Asset Recovery's Charleston auction facility. A longer pause. Yes. That facility. Silence. Then, I believe a retired military working dog's transfer history may have been altered. The warehouse became completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody even pretended not to listen. Harrison continued. Belgian Malinois. Pause. Duke. Longer pause. Correct. His eyes drifted toward Victor. No, I don't think this can wait until Monday. Victor felt a bead of sweat appear near his collar. The call lasted only 3 minutes. When Harrison finished, he closed the phone and returned it to his pocket. The auction manager looked ready to faint. Victor looked ready to explode. What was that? Victor demanded. Harrison looked at him. A precaution. What does that mean? It means someone will be reviewing Duke's transfer records. Victor laughed. The sound carried no humor. You think that's enough to stop a completed sale? No. Harrison's gaze remained steady. I know it is. For the first time all day, Victor lost his composure. You're interfering with a legal transaction. The words echoed through the warehouse. Several people stepped back. Victor's face had darkened. The controlled businessman was beginning to disappear. Something harder was emerging beneath him. Harrison noticed. Interesting again. People revealed themselves under pressure. The colonel had spent decades watching it happen, and Victor Kane was revealing quite a lot. Meanwhile, Serenity felt Duke shift beside her. The old dog remained calm, but she could feel tension running through him. Not aggression. Readiness. The same readiness she'd seen overseas. The same readiness that appeared whenever Duke believed something important was about to happen. She placed a hand against his shoulder. The muscles beneath his fur relaxed slightly. That small movement didn't escape Harrison either. The colonel watched Duke carefully. Then he looked at Serenity. You worked with him for how long? About 14 months. Daily. Almost. Harrison nodded. That's what I thought. Victor frowned. What difference does that make? Harrison turned. Everything. The answer irritated Victor visibly. Harrison continued. Military working dogs aren't equipment. His voice had grown quieter, which somehow made it stronger. They build relationships. He glanced toward Duke. Partnerships. Then toward Serenity. Loyalty. The colonel paused. And when that loyalty survives 6 years, multiple transfers, missing records, behavioral designations, and God knows what else. He looked back toward Victor. I pay attention. The warehouse manager finally spoke. What happens now? Harrison answered immediately. The transfer is suspended. Victor took a step forward. No. Harrison didn't blink. Yes. The sale is completed. Not anymore. The manager looked miserable. But if federal review begins? It has. The manager closed his eyes briefly. That was enough. Everyone understood. The auction was over. Victor Kane had lost. At least for today. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. One of the older veterans near the back started clapping. Slowly. Once. Twice. 3 times. A few others joined him. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough to make the room understand where sympathies were shifting. Victor's face hardened. He looked around the warehouse. The applause wasn't for Harrison. It wasn't even for Serenity. It was for Duke. For a dog who should never have ended up here. Victor turned without another word. He walked toward the exit. Several employees hurried after him. The warehouse doors slammed shut behind them. Only then did Serenity finally breathe. The tension she'd been carrying all day crashed into exhaustion. Her knees felt weak. Her hands trembled slightly. The adrenaline was fading. Reality was returning. Harrison noticed immediately. You haven't slept. Serenity laughed weakly. I just finished a 12-hour shift. The colonel nodded. Of course you did. A familiar voice suddenly spoke nearby. Dumb question. It belonged to a woman in her mid-50s who had been standing quietly among the veterans. Her name was Patricia Holloway. Most people called her Patty. She was short, broad-shouldered, and possessed the practical confidence of someone who had spent decades solving problems without asking permission. Her silver blonde hair was tied into a loose ponytail. She wore worn boots, old jeans, and a retired Army logistics jacket. Patty approached Duke carefully. The old dog watched her, then relaxed. Good sign. You're the nurse? She asked Serenity. Yes. Patty smiled. Good. That seemed to satisfy her completely. Serenity blinked. Good. Patty shrugged. Dog likes you. She pointed toward Duke. I trust his judgment more than most people's. Harrison laughed. Patty continued. Besides, somebody has to take him home. The words hit Serenity unexpectedly. Take him home. Home. For a moment she couldn't answer. Because she had spent so many weeks preparing herself to lose. She hadn't prepared herself to win. Harrison noticed the expression immediately. You have somewhere for him. My apartment. Pet-friendly. Technically. Patty laughed. Technically is how most good stories start. The next several hours passed in paperwork. More paperwork than Serenity thought possible. Transfer holds. Custodial agreements. Temporary guardianship forms. Verification requests. Veterinary releases. Military archive authorizations. The bureaucracy seemed endless. Yet for the first time it was working for Duke instead of against him. By sunset the temporary arrangement was complete. Pending investigation. Pending review. Pending verification. But complete enough. Duke would leave with Serenity. The realization felt almost unreal. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The harbor glowed orange beneath the setting sun. Cargo ships stood motionless against the horizon. For the first time all day, the world felt quiet. Serenity walked beside Duke toward her car. The old Malinois moved carefully. His body carried years of service, years of injuries, years of uncertainty. Yet somehow he seemed lighter than before, as though he understood, as though he knew something had changed. She opened the passenger side rear door. Duke stopped. The dog stared at the car, then at her, then back at the car. Serenity smiled softly. You've never ridden in a Honda before, have you? Patty laughed from behind them. Even Harrison smiled. Duke climbed inside, slowly, cautiously, then settled onto the back seat. The sight nearly broke Serenity's heart, because there was nothing dramatic about it. No heroics, no applause, just an old war dog climbing into a small car, going home, for the first time in years. Harrison approached the driver's side before she got in. His expression had become serious again. The investigation isn't over. Serenity nodded. I know. I think someone manipulated Duke's records. I know. And I don't think we know why yet. The evening breeze moved across the harbor. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Harrison handed her a business card. Simple. White. No decoration. Just a phone number. If anything feels wrong, call me. She looked up. You really think it's that serious? The colonel considered the question, then looked toward the warehouse, toward the office where missing records had appeared, toward the parking lot where Victor Kane's black SUV had disappeared only an hour earlier. Yes. His answer came immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just certainty. The kind earned through experience. Because people don't erase 11 months of military records by accident. The words lingered. Serenity looked back at Duke. The old Malinois had rested his head on the seat, watching her, waiting, trusting, exactly as he had 6 years ago. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away from Charleston Harbor. As the warehouse disappeared in her rearview mirror, Serenity felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not certainty. Not victory. Hope. And beside her, Duke was finally going home. The drive from Charleston to Savannah took a little over 2 hours, but for Serenity Brooks it felt like crossing an invisible border between two different lives. The storm that had covered the harbor earlier had finally broken apart. Afternoon sunlight spilled through the clouds in long golden bands, illuminating stretches of highway lined with pine trees and marshland. Traffic was light. The radio remained off. Most of the journey passed in silence. Duke occupied the rear seat of her aging silver Honda, lying diagonally across the worn upholstery with the quiet alertness of a soldier refusing to fully relax. Every 15 minutes, Serenity glanced into the rearview mirror. Every time she did, Duke was watching her. Not nervously, not anxiously, simply making sure she was still there. The realization tugged at something deep inside her chest. Her name was Margaret Ellis. Most residents simply called her Maggie. She had lived in the building longer than anyone else and unofficially functioned as the neighborhood intelligence network. Margaret was short, sturdy, and permanently suntanned from spending hours tending flowers outside. Years earlier, she had lost her husband to cancer. Instead of becoming bitter, she had developed the habit of adopting everyone else's problems, sometimes whether they wanted help or not. She looked at Duke. Duke looked back. Several seconds passed. Then Margaret nodded. He's handsome. Serenity laughed. That's one word for him. What kind of dog? Belgian Malinois. Margaret whistled softly. He looks like he could arrest somebody. Probably. The old woman chuckled. Duke relaxed slightly. Margaret noticed. Good dog. Then she glanced at Serenity. You look exhausted. I worked all night. And then drove to Charleston. Serenity blinked. You knew? Margaret pointed toward social media on her phone. People talk. Of course they did. News traveled surprisingly fast, especially among retirees with unlimited free time. The old woman smiled warmly. Welcome home. The simple words hit harder than expected. Serenity thanked her, then led Duke upstairs. The apartment measured just under 800 square feet. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, small kitchen, second-hand furniture. Nothing fancy, nothing luxurious. But it was hers. Duke entered cautiously. Immediately, the old military instincts activated. Room clearance, perimeter assessment, threat evaluation. He inspected every corner, every doorway, every window, every closet. The process lasted nearly 40 minutes. Serenity sat quietly on the couch and watched. No interruptions, no pressure. She understood exactly what he was doing. Eventually, Duke completed his inspection. Only then did he settle near the living room window. Not fully relaxed, but closer than before. The first night passed quietly. The second did not. At 4:27 in the morning, Serenity woke to the sound of claws clicking across hardwood flooring. Duke stood near the front door, completely still, listening, his ears pointed forward, his body tense. Serenity immediately recognized the behavior. Hypervigilance. She had seen it countless times. Veterans, police officers, trauma survivors, military dogs. The brain struggled to believe safety was real. Eventually, Duke relaxed, but the pattern repeated. Again the following night, and again after that. The old dog slept lightly, reacted to unfamiliar sounds, checked windows repeatedly, monitored doorways. The war had followed him home, just as it followed many people. 3 days later, Serenity returned to work. St. Matthew Medical Center looked exactly the same as it always had. Bright lights, constant motion, controlled chaos, comfortingly familiar. The emergency department was already busy when she arrived. Nurses moved quickly between treatment rooms. Monitors beeped. Phones rang. Someone somewhere argued with insurance. Normal. Beautifully normal. Mia Patel spotted her first. The younger nurse practically ran across the station. Please tell me that's the dog. Serenity smiled. Good morning to you too. Was that a yes? Yes. Mia threw both hands into the air. Finally, Mia's enthusiasm seemed physically incapable of remaining contained. Several staff members immediately gathered around. Questions followed. Pictures. More questions. Additional pictures. For a few minutes the story felt harmless. Heartwarming. Simple. Then reality returned. At 10:12 a.m. Serenity received a message from Human Resources. The subject line was brief. Please report to Administration Office 3B. Immediately, her stomach tightened. Years in healthcare had taught her something important. Nobody from Human Resources ever requested an immediate meeting to deliver wonderful news. Office 3B occupied a quiet corner of the administrative wing. The room belonged to Yolanda Mercer, Director of Clinical Operations. Yolanda appeared to be in her mid-50s. Tall, elegant, dark-skinned, always impeccably dressed. Her silver-streaked hair was cut short and professional. Everything about her projected competence. She rarely raised her voice, never wasted words, and possessed the unique ability to make physicians nervous simply by entering a room. When Serenity arrived, Yolanda was already seated. Unfortunately, she wasn't alone. A second woman occupied the chair beside her. Thin, pale, severe-looking. The woman's blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun. Her expression suggested smiling required government approval. The badge identified her as Karen Whitlock, Hospital Compliance Officer. That was not encouraging. Sit down, Serenity. The nurse obeyed. Yolanda folded her hands. We received a complaint. There it was. Simple, direct, predictable. Serenity remained calm. What kind of complaint? Karen answered. Concerns regarding professional stability. The words sounded ridiculous, yet the woman spoke them seriously. Specifics. Anonymous source. Of course. Karen continued. The complaint alleges erratic behavior, poor judgment, emotional instability, and actions inconsistent with professional standards. Silence followed. Serenity stared, then blinked, then stared again. Yolanda watched carefully. Finally, Serenity asked the obvious question. Are we talking about the dog auction? Karen shifted slightly. The complaint references a public incident involving a potentially dangerous animal. There it was. Exactly as Harrison predicted. Someone had started moving. Someone powerful. Someone angry. Yolanda leaned forward. I already reviewed your employment history. Serenity remained silent. For years. Pause. Outstanding evaluations. Pause. No disciplinary actions. Pause. No patient complaints. Another pause. The complaint doesn't match the employee. Karen looked unhappy. Yolanda continued. However, there it was. The word everyone hated. However, the hospital is required to document the allegation and conduct a preliminary review. Serenity nodded slowly. Understood. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody threatened her. Nobody suspended her. Yet when she returned to the emergency department, she felt different. Because someone had taken action. Someone had decided the easiest way to reach Duke was through her. The second attack arrived 2 days later. This one targeted her apartment. The property management company received multiple anonymous complaints claiming Serenity was housing a dangerous attack dog. One complaint claimed Duke had threatened residents. Another claimed he had bitten someone. A third alleged illegal training activity. Every accusation was false. Every accusation arrived within 48 hours. Too quickly. Too precisely. The property manager called her directly. His name was Randall Pierce. A nervous man in his 40s with thinning brown hair and permanent worry lines across his forehead. Years managing rental properties had conditioned him to expect disasters, usually involving plumbing. Serenity, he said apologetically, I don't think you've done anything wrong. But corporate requires documentation. Of course they did. Everything required documentation. She provided veterinary records, transfer paperwork, vaccination records, photographs, statements, anything requested. Randall sounded embarrassed throughout the conversation. I just need to check the boxes. I know. Yet the timing wasn't accidental. Nothing about it felt accidental. That evening Harrison Reed called. Serenity answered immediately. You got one too? The colonel sighed. Hospital? Yes. Apartment? Yes. Good. Serenity frowned. Good. Means they're following the pattern. That wasn't reassuring. Harrison continued. Which means we can predict the next move. The words settled heavily. Predict. Not prevent. Predict. Serenity looked toward Duke. The old dog rested near the couch. Watching her. Always watching. What comes next? She asked quietly. Harrison's answer arrived immediately. Your license. The line went silent. Because both of them knew exactly what that meant. And somewhere far away, someone had already started preparing the next attack. The warning came true on a Tuesday morning, which somehow made it worse. Disasters, Serenity had learned, rarely arrived with thunder. More often they came through ordinary emails, polite subject lines, and bureaucratic language, so clean it made cruelty look professional. She had just finished feeding Duke when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee, dog food, and the lavender floor cleaner Margaret Ellis had insisted she try because, according to Margaret, a home with a large dog should smell like a garden, not like a sheriff's office. Duke sat beside the small table, his injured ear angled toward the front door, one amber eye on Serenity and the other on the hallway beyond. He had begun eating more regularly, though only after she placed the bowl down and stepped away. Trust, with Duke, was not a door thrown open. It was a gate unlocked inch by inch. Serenity picked up the phone, expecting a message from the hospital scheduling office. Instead, the sender line read, Georgia Board of Nursing. Her thumb froze before opening it. Some part of her had known Harrison was right. Still, knowing a storm was coming did not make the first crack of lightning any gentler. The notice was formal, careful, and devastating. A complaint had been filed regarding her professional conduct, judgment, and emotional stability following a public incident involving a dangerous animal. The board was not suspending her license, not yet, but it had opened a preliminary review. She was required to submit a written response within 10 business days. Serenity read the notice twice. Then she placed the phone face down on the counter and rested both hands against the edge of the sink. Outside the kitchen window, Savannah looked impossibly peaceful. A delivery truck rolled past. A woman walked a small white dog along the sidewalk. Somewhere below, Margaret was likely watering flowers and judging everyone's parking choices with the quiet authority of a queen inspecting her kingdom. The world kept moving, completely indifferent to the fact that one email could reach inside a person's life and squeeze. Serenity had faced worse things than an administrative review. She had held pressure on wounds that should have killed people. She had carried soldiers through dust and smoke. She had worked emergency rooms where grief arrived faster than the elevators. But this was different. This was not blood on tile or alarms in the trauma bay. This was invisible pressure. It attacked reputation, livelihood, housing, peace. It did not need to prove anything immediately. It only needed to create a file with her name on it. Duke rose without command and came to stand beside her. He did not lean hard. He simply pressed his shoulder against her knee, a silent weight, warm and steady. Serenity looked down. They went for the license, she said. Duke stared up at her as if he understood the shape of danger, even if he did not understand the paperwork. In a way, perhaps he did. Duke had lived inside systems. Orders, transfers, evaluations, kennels, handlers, crates, reports. People had renamed his pain as behavior. They had turned his history into liability language. Now someone was doing the same thing to Serenity. She took a breath, picked up her phone, and called Harrison Reed. He answered on the second ring. Harrison's voice was rough with early morning, but immediately alert. Tell me. He did not ask if something had happened. Men like Harrison did not waste time pretending the obvious was uncertain. Serenity told him about the board notice. There was a long pause, but not an empty one. She could almost hear him arranging facts in his mind. Do not respond directly, he said. Not one word. I know. I'm saying it anyway. I know. Duke watched her face. Harrison continued. I'm sending you a name. Rebecca Stone. She's an attorney in Atlanta, but she handles professional licensing cases across Georgia and Florida. Former Army JAG before private practice. If anyone can turn this around before it grows teeth, it's Rebecca. Serenity rubbed her forehead. I can't afford a major attorney, Harrison. Call her. That isn't an answer. It is the only answer you need this morning. His tone softened by half an inch. Serenity, listen carefully. This isn't just about Duke anymore. Someone is testing every pressure point around you. Your job, your home, your license. They want you tired, scared, and alone. The best way to disappoint them is to stop being alone. She closed her eyes briefly. She hated how much she needed that sentence. Send me her number. Rebecca Stone called Serenity before Serenity had the chance to call her. That alone told her Harrison had already moved pieces on the board. Rebecca's voice was controlled, low, and sharp around the edges, the voice of a woman who did not confuse politeness with weakness. They met that afternoon by video because Rebecca was in Atlanta preparing for another hearing. She appeared on screen from an office lined with bookshelves, legal binders, and one framed black and white photograph of a younger Rebecca in uniform. Rebecca Stone was 46, tall, even-seated, with copper-brown skin, short natural hair shaped close to her head, and dark eyes that missed nothing. A narrow scar crossed the back of her left hand, visible when she lifted a pen. Her face had the calm severity of someone who had once believed rules protected honorable people, then learned rules could also be sharpened into knives. She wore a cream blouse, no jewelry except small gold studs, and spoke with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. I reviewed the board notice Harrison forwarded, she said. It is vague, which is good for us and bad for whoever filed it. Serenity sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, Duke lying near her feet. Why bad for them? Because vague complaints are usually meant to intimidate, not prove. If they had solid evidence, they would lead with it. Rebecca made a note. We will answer, but we will answer like adults in a room where facts matter. Employment record, supervisor statement, auction witness statements, transfer documents, any communications from property management, any anonymous complaints, everything. Serenity gathered documents for 3 hours. She sent Rebecca the hospital notice, the apartment complaints, the Duke transfer hold paperwork, veterinary records, photographs from the auction, and Harrison's written statement. Yolanda Mercer provided a brief but powerful employment summary by evening. It was pure Yolanda, no emotion, no wasted words, no defensive pleading. Serenity Brooks has served as an emergency department nurse at St. Matthew Medical Center for 4 years. Her clinical judgment is sound, her conduct professional, and her performance record without disciplinary incident. I have no basis to question her stability or fitness to practice. Serenity read the statement twice and felt something inside her loosen slightly. Yolanda was not warm. She was something better. Reliable. The civil claim arrived 3 days later. It came by courier in a thick envelope that looked expensive enough to be hostile. Kane Protective Solutions, through outside counsel, alleged interference with lawful purchase, reputational damage, disruption of a private auction, and financial loss related to Duke's suspended transfer. Serenity stood in the apartment lobby holding the envelope while Margaret Ellis peered over her glasses from beside the mailboxes. That looks like the kind of paper rich people use when they want to sound injured, Margaret said. Serenity almost laughed despite herself. That is surprisingly accurate. Margaret folded her arms. Do you need tea or bail money? Hopefully neither. Good. I'm better at tea. Rebecca was less amused when Serenity forwarded the documents. They are stacking pressure, she said. Board complaint. Housing complaints. Civil claim. Same strategy from different angles. Can they win? Not easily. That wasn't no. Rebecca's expression sharpened. No, they cannot win if we fight properly. But they do not need to win quickly. They need to make standing up more expensive than surrendering. Serenity looked toward Duke, who had lifted his head at Rebecca's voice from the laptop. So what do? We make it more expensive for them. That was the moment the story began changing shape. Rebecca did not merely respond. She investigated. By the end of the week, she had pulled corporate filings for Southern Sentinel Asset Recovery and discovered it had a contractual relationship with Kane Protective Solutions. That was not surprising. What interested her was a consulting firm listed repeatedly in payment disclosures, Palmetto Civic Strategies. The name sounded harmless, almost sleepy, like a company that produced brochures for town meetings. Rebecca did not trust harmless names. Palmetto Civic Strategies had 3 employees on paper, a rented office in Jacksonville, Florida, and a managing partner named Malcolm Voss. Malcolm was 58, a former city procurement advisor with a smooth public smile, a heavy jaw, thinning black hair dyed a little too dark, and the reputation of a man who could make contracts move without leaving fingerprints. He had spent years near municipal infrastructure deals in Jacksonville, always close enough to influence outcomes, never close enough to be blamed when questions appeared. His old colleagues described him as charming. Rebecca described him differently. Men like Malcolm Voss don't charm people, she told Serenity over the phone. They assess what someone wants and sell them permission to want it. The Jacksonville connection made Harrison quiet when Rebecca briefed him and Serenity on a conference call. Harrison had pulled his own contacts, and what he found did not calm anyone. Kane Protective Solutions held several security contracts tied to port facilities, emergency management buildings, and municipal infrastructure in Jacksonville. The contracts were worth millions. Some were up for renewal. Others had been extended without meaningful competitive review. Southern Sentinel's K9 auctions, which supposedly handled retired and surplus working dogs, appeared in the background of those deals as a supplier of specialized canine assets. Duke had passed through that supplier pipeline. His missing 11 months overlapped with a period when Kane Protective Solutions was bidding for a Jacksonville port security expansion. Serenity listened from her kitchen table, with Duke asleep near her chair, his muzzle twitching slightly in dreams. Outside, rain tapped softly on the windows. The whole thing sounded absurdly large compared to her life. Her apartment was small. Her savings were smaller. Her world was shifts, rent, groceries, Duke's food, and trying to sleep more than 4 hours at a time. Yet somehow a dog she had found behind chain link had led to contracts, consultants, city boards, and men who treated truth like an accounting inconvenience. Why would Duke matter to a Jacksonville contract? Serenity asked. Rebecca answered first. Maybe he doesn't by himself. Harrison added. Maybe his records do. Silence followed. Serenity understood slowly. Duke was not valuable because Victor wanted him as a dog. Duke was dangerous because his file was wrong. If one file had been altered, others might have been altered too. If one retired military dog had disappeared through a private pipeline with missing evaluations and false behavioral designations, there might be more. And if those dogs had been listed as high risk, retrained, repurposed, resold, or written off in ways that affected insurance, contract compliance, or government procurement standards, then Duke was not just a dog. He was evidence, a living thread attached to a buried machine. That night, Serenity could not sleep. Duke noticed, as he noticed everything. He rose from his place near the window and padded into the kitchen, where she stood barefoot in the blue light of the microwave clock. She had opened the refrigerator without wanting anything from it. Duke sat beside her and looked at the empty shelves with solemn judgment. Don't start, she whispered. You eat better than I do. He huffed once through his nose. It was not quite a laugh, but close enough that Serenity smiled. For a few seconds, humor opened a small window in the heaviness. Then she closed the refrigerator and slid down to sit on the kitchen floor. Duke lowered himself beside her with the careful stiffness of an old soldier whose joints remembered every mile. Serenity rested her hand on his neck. I thought I was bringing you home, she said softly. I didn't know you were bringing the war with you. Duke placed his head against her shoulder. It was awkward, heavy, and perfect. The next morning brought another development. Rebecca had obtained metadata from the complaints sent to the apartment management company. 2 of the supposedly anonymous complaints had been submitted through a public form, but the attached files carried creation data linking them to a device registered to a contractor used by Kane Protective Solutions. It was not proof enough for a courtroom thunderclap, but it was enough for leverage. Rebecca sent a preservation letter to Kane's attorneys requiring them to retain all communications, records, internal messages, and contractor instructions related to Serenity, Duke, Southern Sentinel, and the Charleston auction. That letter will make them unhappy, Rebecca said. Good, Serenity replied before she could stop herself. Rebecca looked pleased. There she is. At the hospital, the pressure remained quieter but present. Some colleagues had heard about the review. Most were kind. A few were cautious in the way people become cautious when someone else's trouble might splash onto their shoes. Serenity did not blame them, but she noticed. Nurses lived under licenses. A complaint, even a weak one, had gravity. Mia Patel remained aggressively loyal. She brought Serenity coffee, snacks, and once a small stuffed Belgian Malinois she found online. For morale, she said. It looks nothing like Duke, Serenity replied. Correct. Duke looks like he audits souls. This one looks like it pays taxes. Serenity laughed for the first time in days. Yolanda Mercer called Serenity into her office again at the end of shift. This time Karen Whitlock was not present. Yolanda closed the door and studied her with that steady administrative gaze. The board requested employment verification, she said. I sent it. Thank you. Yolanda leaned back. I also received a second inquiry from Hospital Legal about whether your situation poses reputational risk. Serenity's mouth went dry. And I told them your reputation is one of competence, restraint, and poor meal planning. Serenity blinked. Yolanda's face did not change. That last part was not in writing. For one fragile second, the absurdity of it saved them both. Then Yolanda's expression softened slightly. Be careful, Serenity. People with money often mistake process for morality. They believe if they can generate enough paperwork, they can become right. Serenity nodded. I'm learning that. Learn faster. By the end of the second week, Rebecca had mapped the outline. Victor Kane wanted Duke back, yes, but not because of attachment or even practical value. Duke's suspended transfer had triggered a review. That review threatened to expose missing records tied to Southern Sentinel. Southern Sentinel connected to Kane's supply chain. Kane connected to Jacksonville municipal security contracts. Those contracts connected to Palmetto Civic Strategies and Malcolm Voss. The money moved in loops disguised as consulting fees, training reimbursements, canine acquisition costs, and emergency readiness assessments. The pattern was not complete, but it was visible enough to be dangerous. Rebecca sent Serenity a summary late on Friday. Serenity read it at her kitchen table while Duke watched the front door. Her life had become a strange kingdom of documents. Each page another torch lit in a tunnel she had never meant to enter. Harrison called shortly after. His voice carried a heaviness that told her the news was not finished. I need you to understand something, he said. Victor Kane may be the face of this, but he may not be the highest person involved. Serenity looked at Duke. The old dog's ears twitched at Harrison's voice. Who is? I don't know yet. That's comforting. Harrison gave a dry breath that might have been a laugh in another life. No, it isn't. He paused. But Duke's file matters. That much is clear now. Whatever happened during those missing 11 months, someone wanted it hidden badly enough to come after your job, your home, and your license. Serenity closed the folder on the table. Then we find out what happened. That decision has consequences. So did leaving him there. Harrison said nothing for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Caleb would have liked you saying that. The name landed gently and painfully at the same time. Serenity looked down at Duke. Caleb would have stolen Duke from the warehouse and blamed poor signage. Harrison laughed then, a Rayal laugh, brief but warm. Yes, he absolutely would have. Later, after the call ended, Serenity turned off the kitchen light and stood by the window. Savannah slept under a humid darkness, the street lamps glowing through the branches of old oaks. Duke stood beside her, shoulder against her leg. Somewhere beyond the quiet streets, beyond the hospital, beyond the city, men in offices were probably speaking her name with irritation. They might have thought she was small. A tired nurse. A woman with rent due and an old Honda and a dog too large for her apartment. In some ways, they were right. She was not powerful in the way they understood power. She had no contracts, no lobbyists, no polished boardroom smile. But she had Duke. She had Harrison. She had Rebecca Stone sharpening facts into weapons. And she had the stubborn, ancient knowledge that some battles are chosen not because a person is ready, but because walking away would cost the soul too much. Duke had become the living key to something bigger than either of them. A forgotten war dog had carried the first clue home in his wounded body and broken paperwork. And Serenity, whether she wanted the role or not, now stood at the edge of a corruption network that stretched all the way to Jacksonville, Florida. The night the stranger came to Serenity Brooks's door, Savannah was wrapped in the kind of humid darkness that made every sound seem closer than it should have been. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the streets glossy beneath the yellow glow of lamps. and the old oak trees outside her apartment building dripped slowly onto the sidewalk like they were counting down to something. Serenity had come home from St. Matthew Medical Center just after 10, too tired to cook properly and too restless to sleep. The emergency department had been relentless that day. A warehouse fall, a child with a fever that turned into something more serious, 2 car accidents, and one elderly man who kept apologizing for bleeding on the floor as if the floor had feelings. Serenity had smiled, patched, stabilized, charted, and moved from one crisis to the next with the steady calm everyone expected from her. But calm, she had learned, was not the same as peace. Calm was what she gave other people. Peace was something she had not been able to keep for herself. Duke knew it before she admitted it. The old Belgian Malinois had followed her from the kitchen to the living room, then from the living room to the small hallway, then back again, his claws clicking softly against the worn wood floor. He had been living with her for several weeks now, long enough to understand the rhythm of the apartment, but not long enough to trust it completely. He was almost 9 years old, large and deep-chested, with a dark fawn coat marked by black along his face and silver beginning around his muzzle. The scar near his left ear caught the low light whenever he turned his head, a pale raised line that looked like a seam where the past had been stitched badly into the present. His left eye carried a faint cloud at the edge, but his focus remained sharp enough to make most people feel examined rather than observed. Duke did not waste movement. When he stood with purpose. When he slept as if duty might call him back at any moment. And when Serenity hurt, even quietly, he noticed. She sat at the kitchen table with Rebecca Stone's latest legal summary open on her laptop. The words had begun to blur. Civil claim. Preservation letter. Licensing review. Contract disclosure. Municipal security procurement. Palmetto civic strategies. Jacksonville port expansion. Each phrase seemed reasonable on its own, but together they formed a maze she had never meant to enter. Somewhere inside that maze stood Victor Kane, Malcolm Voss, Southern Sentinel, and a trail of money that had touched Duke's missing records. Serenity had spent most of her adult life believing danger looked like blood, smoke, broken glass, or a radio call that came in too sharp. Now danger looked like forwarded emails, legal headers, and polite threats written by attorneys with expensive fonts. Duke sat beside her chair and rested his chin on her knee. Serenity looked down at him. "You're not subtle, you know." Duke blinked once. "No, I'm not eating another granola bar. That was dinner." He exhaled through his nose in a way that sounded judgmental. She almost smiled. Almost. There were moments when Duke's presence made the apartment feel less like a place under pressure and more like a tiny fortress built by 2 tired survivors. He had claimed the space between the couch and the front window as his observation point. From there he could see the door, the kitchen, and part of the parking lot below. Serenity had bought him a thick orthopedic dog bed, which he ignored for 3 days until Margaret Ellis marched upstairs with a fleece blanket and announced that all male creatures, regardless of species, required proper instructions about comfort. Margaret had spread the blanket over the bed, pointed at it, and told Duke, "That is yours, soldier." Duke had stared at her with the solemn suspicion of a creature evaluating command authority. Then he had stepped onto the bed and lain down. Serenity had laughed so hard she nearly cried. Margaret, satisfied, had said, "See? Men listen when you use the right tone." That memory helped for a moment. Then her phone buzzed. Not a call. A notification. An unknown number. Serenity stared at the screen. No message appeared beyond a single line. Still fighting? Her body went cold before her mind caught up. She did not touch the phone. She did not reply. Rebecca had said not to respond to unknown numbers. Harrison had said the same thing. Document, screenshot, forward. No engagement. No emotion given away for free. Serenity picked up the phone carefully, captured the message, and forwarded it to Rebecca and Harrison. Duke had lifted his head. His ears were forward now. "It's okay," Serenity whispered. Duke did not believe her. She did not fully believe herself either. The message came at 10:47 p.m. At 11:12, Rebecca called. Rebecca Stone's face appeared on video, though her camera was angled slightly downward as if she had opened her laptop in a hurry. Even late at night, she looked composed. Her short natural hair was wrapped in a dark silk scarf, and she wore a gray sweater over what was probably still her work blouse. Behind her, The Atlanta office lights were dim except for a desk lamp glowing over a stack of marked documents. Rebecca was the kind of woman who made exhaustion look organized. Her dark eyes scanned Serenity's face first, then the room behind her. Doors locked. Yes. Windows. Checked. Duke with you? Serenity glanced down. Duke stood near the hallway now, no longer resting. His body had changed without drama. Weight forward, shoulders squared, ears lifted, head low enough to move quickly. He was listening to something she could not hear. Yes, Serenity said. Very much with me. Rebecca noticed her glance. What is he doing? Listening. To what? I don't know. Rebecca's expression sharpened. Put me on speaker. Do not hang up. Serenity tapped the speaker icon and set the phone on the table. The apartment became very quiet. At first, she heard only the refrigerator humming and the faint murmur of Margaret's television through the wall below. Then Duke took 2 slow steps toward the front door. Serenity stood. The hallway outside her apartment was narrow, carpeted, and usually noisy in familiar ways. Pipes clicked behind walls. The elevator groaned. Neighbors came and went. At night, sound traveled oddly through the building, stretching footsteps into whispers and making distant doors seem near. Serenity held still and listened. There it was. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Not Margaret's shuffle. Not Randall the property manager's nervous quick walk. Not a neighbor coming home carelessly. These steps paused between movements, as if the person making them did not want the rhythm to be remembered. Duke moved in front of Serenity. No command. No bark. Only placement. His body became a barrier between her and the door. Rebecca's voice came softly through the phone. Serenity. Someone is outside. Do not approach the door. I'm not. The footsteps stopped. Directly outside her apartment. Serenity felt her pulse in her throat. She had been afraid before. Many times. Fear was not new. But this fear had a different shape. It was intimate. Personal. It had climbed the stairs to her home and stood on the other side of cheap painted wood. Duke's lips lifted just enough to reveal the edge of his teeth. Still no bark. That frightened Serenity more than barking would have. A barking dog warned. A silent military dog decided. Then the doorknob moved. Slowly. Not a knock. Not a mistake. The knob turned once, stopped against the lock, then eased back. Serenity's breath caught. Duke exploded forward only 3 feet, stopping just short of the door, and released a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It was not loud at first. It was worse than loud. It sounded ancient, like thunder still trapped beneath a mountain. The movement outside froze. Rebecca's voice became sharp. Call 911 now. Use another phone if you have one. Serenity grabbed her old backup cell from the kitchen drawer, the one she kept charged for emergencies because military habits died hard. Her fingers were steady, which surprised her. Training, she thought distantly. Trauma nursing, combat medicine, all the old gods of crisis returning to hold her hands still while her soul shook. She dialed. The dispatcher answered. Serenity gave her name, address, and description in a quiet voice. Unknown person outside my apartment attempted the door handle. I am inside. Door is locked. My dog alerted before I heard them. The dispatcher stayed on the line. The person outside moved again. This time the footsteps retreated. Not running. Walking. Controlled. Down the hall. Toward the stairs. Duke remained at the door, every muscle engaged. Serenity wanted to look through the peephole. She did not. Wanting was not the same as wise. She waited until the stairwell door opened and closed. Then silence returned, too large and too empty. Police arrived 19 minutes later. The responding officer was a woman named Denise Alvarez. She was in her late 30s, medium height, broad-hipped and strong, with tense skin, dark hair pulled into a tight bun, and watchful brown eyes that suggested she had heard every possible version of "it was probably nothing" and believed very few of them. Her uniform was neat, her voice professional, and she moved with the grounded caution of someone who had once underestimated a situation and promised herself never to do it again. Duke did not bark when Serenity opened the door with the chain still engaged. He stood behind her left hip, visible but controlled. Officer Alvarez looked at him, then back at Serenity. That your dog? Yes. He the one who alerted? Yes. Alvarez nodded. Good dog. Duke stared at her. He accepts the compliment, Serenity said. For the first time that night, Alvarez almost smiled. She took the report seriously. She checked the hallway, stairwell, and exterior entrance. She asked if anyone had threatened Serenity recently. Serenity hesitated only long enough to decide honesty was now safer than privacy. She told Alvarez about the auction, Duke, the civil claim, the licensing complaint, the unknown message. Not every detail, but enough. Alvarez wrote carefully. Her expression did not change much, but Serenity saw the moment the officer stopped treating the incident as a possible misunderstanding and began treating it as a piece of something larger. "You have cameras in this building?" Alvarez asked. "One in the lobby. Maybe one over the side entrance. Property manager would know. Get that footage first thing in the morning. Do not wait. Ask him to preserve it." "I will." Alvarez glanced at Duke again. "Until then, keep him close." That was already the plan. Good plan. After the officer left, Serenity locked the door, checked it twice, then sat on the floor beside Duke because her legs no longer trusted the idea of standing. Rebecca remained on the phone the entire time. Harrison called 5 minutes after the police left, his voice colder than Serenity had ever heard it. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Door damaged?" "No." "Did Duke make contact?" "No." "He scared them off." "Good." The word carried more relief than approval. Serenity leaned back against the wall. Duke stood beside her, still watching the door. "This wasn't Victor's usual style," she said. Harrison was silent. Rebecca, still on speaker, answered first. "No. Victor uses paper. Lawyers. Pressure. This was different." "Malcolm Voss?" Serenity asked. "Maybe," Harrison said. "Or someone connected to the Jacksonville contracts who thinks Victor is failing." The apartment seemed colder. Serenity looked at Duke. He had not relaxed. Not fully. His breathing was slow, controlled, but his eyes remained fixed on the door. "They came to my home," she said. "Yes," Rebecca replied. "And that was a mistake." There was something in her voice that made Serenity look at the phone. Rebecca continued, "Because now this is not just professional pressure or civil intimidation. Now there is a police report. Now we have a timeline. Now they have escalated in a way that can be documented." Harrison added, "And scared people make mistakes." Nobody slept much that night. Serenity tried. Duke refused. Eventually, she gave up and sat on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders while Duke maintained watch from the front window. Dawn came slowly, gray and damp, bringing with it the ordinary sounds of the building waking up. Margaret knocked at 7:15 carrying a casserole dish that smelled like eggs, cheese, and maternal aggression. Margaret Ellis wore a purple housecoat, white sneakers, and an expression that suggested she had already declared war on whoever had disturbed her building. Her silver hair was pinned unevenly, and her blue eyes were brighter than caffeine had any right to make them. "I heard police," Margaret said. Serenity opened the door. Duke stood beside her, but did not block Margaret. That was progress. Margaret looked at him. "You did your job?" Duke stared. "Of course you did." She handed Serenity the dish. "Eat. Then call Randall. I already texted him to pull lobby footage. He said he'd be here by 8. I told him if he wasn't, I'd come downstairs in slippers and make it theological." Despite everything, Serenity laughed. "You threatened him with theology? I'm Baptist. It's implied." By 8:10, Randall Pierce had pulled the footage from the lobby camera. He looked more anxious than usual, which was impressive. His thinning brown hair stuck up in the back, and his shirt was buttoned incorrectly. He had clearly dressed in a hurry. The video showed a man entering at 10:39 p.m. through the side door, not the lobby. The camera angle caught only part of him. Dark jacket, baseball cap, gloves, average height, face angled away. He moved like someone aware of cameras. He exited at 11:15 through the same side door. Rebecca requested the footage immediately. Harrison requested it too. Officer Alvarez added it to the report. At 9:26 a.m., as Serenity sat at the kitchen table with coffee she had reheated twice and still not drunk, her phone rang. Unknown number. She let it ring. Then a voicemail appeared. Duke lifted his head. Serenity played it on speaker only after forwarding the number to Rebecca. A woman's voice filled the room. Low, careful, trembling, but not weak. "My name is Natalie Quinn. I work inside Kane Protective Solutions. You don't know me, but I know what they're doing to you. I know about Duke. I know about the missing records. And I know who authorized the pressure campaign after Charleston." Serenity stopped breathing. The voice continued. "I have documents. 2 years of them. Contracts, payment trails, internal memos, names. I can prove the public security bids were manipulated. I can prove payments were routed through shell vendors. And I can prove people who tried to report it before were threatened until they disappeared from the process. A pause. When Natalie spoke again, her voice cracked slightly. I stayed quiet too long. I'm not proud of that. But when they sent someone to your apartment, I realized they were willing to do to you what they did to the others. Another pause. Shorter. If you want the truth, have Rebecca Stone call this number before noon. After that, I destroy this phone. The voicemail ended. Serenity sat frozen. Duke stood and came beside her, pressing his shoulder against her leg. For a moment, the apartment seemed to hold its breath. Then Rebecca Stone called. Her first words were simple. Forward me everything. Now. Rebecca Stone called Natalie Quinn exactly 11 minutes after the voicemail arrived. Not 10. Not 12. 11. Rebecca believed timing mattered. People willing to become whistleblowers often lived in a fragile space between courage and fear. Wait too long and fear regained control. Move too quickly and trust collapsed. Serenity sat across from her laptop at the kitchen table while Duke rested beside her chair. The old Malinois appeared calm, but his ears remained alert. Since the attempted intrusion the night before, he had become even more watchful. He inspected windows more frequently, checked the hallway every time someone walked past the apartment. Slept lightly. Serenity understood. She was doing the same thing. The call connected on speaker. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then a woman's voice emerged. You called. Natalie Quinn sounded younger than Serenity expected. Not young, perhaps early 40s, but younger than the image she had unconsciously built. There was intelligence in her voice. Also exhaustion. The particular exhaustion that came from carrying secrets for too long. This is Rebecca Stone, Rebecca said calmly. I know. You asked me to call. Yes. Can you prove what you claimed? Silence. Then, yes. Rebecca leaned slightly forward. Start talking. Another pause. Natalie exhaled slowly. My name is Natalie Quinn. I'm 43 years old. I currently serve as Senior Contract Compliance Director for Kane Protective Solutions. Serenity immediately understood why this mattered. Natalie wasn't a receptionist. She wasn't an assistant. She wasn't somebody repeating rumors. She sat close to the financial machinery. Very close. Natalie continued. I've worked there 11 years. Why contact us now? Rebecca asked. The answer came instantly. Because someone went to Serenity's apartment. Silence filled the room. Natalie spoke again. When pressure campaigns begin targeting homes, things escalate. The words carried experience. Too much experience. Rebecca heard it too. You've seen this before. Yes. How many times? Another long pause. More than once. Serenity felt her stomach tighten. Natalie continued. People usually think corruption looks dramatic. It doesn't. Her voice grew steadier. It starts small. Pause. A complaint. Pause. A review. Pause. A rumor. Pause. Then pressure increases until the target decides fighting isn't worth it. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Who authorized the campaign against Serenity? Natalie answered immediately. Victor Kane. No hesitation. No uncertainty. No doubt. The name landed heavily. Yet somehow Rebecca didn't look surprised. Only confirmed. What proof do you have? Natalie laughed softly. A sad sound. I've been collecting evidence for 2 years. Now everyone became very quiet. 2 years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. That changed everything. Natalie continued. My job gave me access to compliance records. Pause. Eventually, I realized compliance wasn't the goal. What was? Appearance. Rebecca nodded slowly. That answer made sense. Very dangerous sense. The purpose wasn't following rules. The purpose was looking like they followed rules. Natalie continued. I copied documents. How many? Hundreds. The room went silent again. Serenity looked at Duke. The old dog had lifted his head. Watching her. Always watching. Rebecca asked the next question carefully. What exactly do these documents show? Natalie answered. Manipulated bidding processes. Pause. Shell companies. Pause. False consulting agreements. Pause. Payment routing. Pause. Contract steering. Another pause. Then. And witness intimidation. That last phrase felt different. Heavier. Rebecca noticed immediately. Witness intimidation? Yes. Explain. Natalie's breathing became audible. For a moment, Serenity wondered if the woman would stop talking. Instead, she kept going. There were employees who complained. Pause. Former contractors. Pause. Auditors. Pause. Subcontractors. Pause. People who noticed irregularities. The next words came more quietly. They were handled. Serenity hated that phrase immediately. Handled. People weren't machinery. They weren't problems. Yet somebody clearly thought otherwise. Rebecca's voice hardened. What does handled mean? Natalie answered. Investigations. Pause. Anonymous complaints. Pause. Professional reviews. Pause. Termination threats. Pause. Legal pressure. Every word sounded familiar. Too familiar. Because the same thing was happening to Serenity. Rebecca understood too. They used the same strategy. Yes. Repeatedly. Yes. The answer arrived without hesitation. A pattern. Not an exception. A pattern. The realization changed everything. Until now, Victor Kane could claim coincidence. Bad luck. Misunderstanding. Concern. Now those explanations were beginning to die. Rebecca sat back slightly. When can we meet? Natalie didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded frightened. Someone is watching me. The statement chilled the room. Not because of the words. Because of the sincerity behind them. Natalie genuinely believed it. Rebecca remained calm. What happened? The last 3 weeks? Pause. Vehicles outside my apartment. Pause. Unknown calls. Pause. People asking questions. Pause. Someone accessed my office after hours. Serenity felt cold. Natalie wasn't imagining things. The details were too specific. Too organized. Too familiar. Rebecca thought for several seconds. Then made a decision. We don't meet in person. Natalie sounded relieved. Good. We use secure transfer. I already prepared one. Of course she had. Natalie had been planning this. Possibly for months. Maybe longer. Rebecca opened a notebook. Tell me. The next 20 minutes passed quickly. Passwords. Encryption keys. File locations. Verification procedures. Backup protocols. Emergency contacts. Natalie sounded prepared for every scenario. Because she probably was. People who survived inside corrupt systems learned preparation the way soldiers learn discipline. Eventually, the conversation ended. Before hanging up, Rebecca asked one final question. Natalie. Yes. Why didn't you come forward sooner? The silence lasted nearly 10 seconds. When Natalie finally answered, her voice sounded smaller. More human. I was afraid. Nobody judged her. Not one person. Because fear was understandable. Fear was normal. Fear was honest. Then she added something else. I kept telling myself someone else would do it. Another pause. Nobody did. The call ended. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Rebecca looked directly into the camera. She's legitimate. Harrison Reed appeared on the second conference line moments later. He had joined remotely from Charleston. The retired colonel listened quietly as Rebecca summarized the conversation. When she finished, Harrison nodded once. I agree. You believe her? Yes. Why? Harrison glanced toward the window behind him. Because people lie differently. Rebecca smiled faintly. That was a very Harrison answer. Not technical. Not legal. Human. 3 hours later, the first documents arrived. Rebecca opened them, then immediately stopped speaking. That alone frightened Serenity. Rebecca almost always had something to say. Now she simply stared. Reading. Scrolling. Reading again. The attorney's expression changed gradually. Curiosity. Concern. Shock. Then anger. Real anger. Finally, Rebecca looked up. Oh my God. Nobody liked hearing those words from their lawyer. Nobody. What? Serenity asked. Rebecca turned the screen. The document displayed a payment spreadsheet. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Rows. Columns. Invoices. Transfers. Corporate accounting language. Then Rebecca highlighted several entries. The same money appeared repeatedly, moving through different companies, different names, different accounts, yet always returning to the same destination. Shell companies, Rebecca said quietly. Serenity stared. She wasn't an accountant, but even she could see something was wrong. The pattern repeated too perfectly. Rebecca opened another file, then another, then another, each one connected to the last. Contract awards, consulting payments, procurement reviews, risk assessments, security evaluations. The paperwork formed a web, a very large web, and at the center sat several familiar names. Victor Kane, Malcolm Voss, Palmetto Civic Strategies. Others appeared too, names nobody recognized yet, which worried Harrison considerably. How many people are involved? Serenity asked. Rebecca looked up slowly. More than we thought. That wasn't reassuring. Not even slightly. The next file proved even worse. Internal communications. Emails. Messages. Meeting summaries. One section immediately caught Rebecca's attention. A discussion regarding retired military working dogs. Duke's name appeared 3 times. The room became completely silent. Rebecca read carefully, then more carefully, then a 3rd time. What is it? Harrison asked. Rebecca looked stunned. Duke wasn't supposed to reach the auction. Nobody understood. What? Rebecca highlighted a paragraph. According to this communication, she swallowed. Someone ordered Duke transferred to a private holding facility 18 months ago. Silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Rebecca continued reading. The transfer never completed. Why? Serenity asked. Rebecca opened another document. Then another. Finally, she found the answer. And immediately wished she hadn't. Because the answer made the entire situation worse. Far worse. A compliance auditor had flagged inconsistencies in Duke's record. Medical inconsistencies. Behavioral inconsistencies. Transfer inconsistencies. Questions had been raised. Too many questions. The review threatened to expose broader irregularities. Then suddenly Duke disappeared from the system for 11 months. The exact 11 months Harrison had identified. Nobody spoke. Because everyone understood. The missing records weren't random. They had a purpose. Someone had hidden Duke. And someone else had erased the evidence. The old dog lying quietly beside Serenity suddenly seemed much larger than before. Not physically. Historically. Duke wasn't simply a retired military dog anymore. He was proof. Living proof. The kind that frightened powerful people. Late that evening, another person entered the story. His name was Ethan Walker. 48 years old. Investigative journalist. Tall. Lean. Sharp-featured. Silver beginning to creep through dark hair. A permanent 5 o'clock shadow. Blue eyes that seemed permanently focused on details other people missed. Ethan had spent 20 years exposing political corruption, procurement fraud, and financial misconduct. He had lost jobs because of stories, lost friendships, lost opportunities, but never lost curiosity. Curiosity defined him. Rebecca called him after reviewing Natalie's files. At first he assumed she was exaggerating. Lawyers often did. Then she showed him 3 documents. Only 3. That was enough. By midnight, Ethan had canceled weekend plans, requested public records, contacted 2 former sources, opened 4 separate investigations, and started building a timeline. 1 hour later, he called Rebecca back. His voice sounded energized, almost alarmingly energized. This isn't about a dog. No, it isn't even about Jacksonville. Rebecca nodded. I know. Silence. Then Ethan spoke carefully. The money goes farther. How much farther? The journalist looked down at his notes, then back up. Far more serious now. Far enough to make very powerful people nervous. The statement settled heavily across the conversation, because everyone knew what it meant. This story was growing. Faster than anyone expected. Larger than anyone expected. More dangerous than anyone expected. And at the center of it all sat an aging Belgian Malinois resting quietly beside a nurse who had simply wanted to bring him home. Neither of them had asked for this fight. Yet somehow they had become the key to exposing it. As midnight approached, Rebecca saved copies of every document in multiple locations. Harrison contacted additional trusted sources. Ethan built timelines. Natalie disappeared back into the shadows. And Serenity sat quietly beside Duke, watching the city lights beyond her apartment window, thinking, wondering, preparing. Because for the first time since Charleston Harbor, one truth had become undeniable. They were no longer defending themselves. Now they were uncovering something. The first article appeared on a Thursday morning at exactly 6 a.m. By 6:07, Ethan Walker's phone was already ringing. By 6:15, it was ringing continuously. By 7 o'clock, the story had escaped the internet and entered the real world. And by noon, people across the United States were talking about a retired military dog named Duke. Ethan sat alone in his office overlooking downtown Jacksonville, Florida, watching the numbers climb across 3 separate screens. At 48 years old, he had spent more than 2 decades exposing corruption, He had investigated governors, city officials, contractors, police departments, and corporate executives. Most of those stories followed predictable patterns. A document surfaced. A source spoke. Evidence accumulated. Officials denied everything. Eventually, the truth emerged. This story was different. Because the public didn't see spreadsheets first. They saw Duke. The article opened with a photograph taken outside the Charleston warehouse. Duke sat beside Serenity Brooks. His scarred face was turned slightly toward her. Her hand rested on his shoulder. The image looked simple, almost ordinary, yet something about it stopped people. Perhaps it was the trust visible between them. Perhaps it was the knowledge that someone had tried to separate them. Or perhaps people simply recognized loyalty when they saw it. Whatever the reason, the image spread faster than Ethan had expected. The headline read, "Missing Military K-9 Records Lead to Questions About Multi-Million-Dollar Security Contracts." The story itself went much deeper. It detailed the missing 11 months in Duke's official history. It outlined the unusual transfer records. It examined the financial connections between Kane Protective Solutions, Southern Sentinel Asset Recovery, and multiple consulting firms. It referenced anonymous complaints filed against a nurse shortly after she challenged Duke's transfer. It included statements from military veterans, former auditors, contract specialists, legal experts, and for the first time, someone publicly asked a question that many powerful people desperately wanted buried. Why had Duke disappeared from official records? The article exploded. By lunchtime, national veteran organizations were sharing it. Military forums discussed it. Retired handlers recognized Duke's photograph. Former military working dog trainers began posting comments. The story traveled through thousands of veterans faster than any advertising campaign could have managed. Because veterans understood something immediately. Duke wasn't simply a dog. He represented all the working animals who had served quietly beside them. The animals who never received medals, never appeared in speeches, never told their own stories. By evening, support messages arrived from every corner of the country. Some came from retired soldiers, others from military families. Many came from people who simply loved dogs. The common theme remained the same. Find the truth. Serenity discovered this while sitting at her kitchen table after work. Her phone refused to stop vibrating. Messages, emails, social media notifications, interview requests, podcast invitations, news inquiries. Most were respectful. Many were emotional. Several came from veterans who remembered working dogs they had never forgotten. One message arrived from a retired Army sergeant living in Montana. "My K-9 partner saved my life twice. If someone erased his history, I'd fight too." Another came from a Marine widow in Texas. "Thank you for refusing to walk away." Serenity read every message. Not because she enjoyed attention. She didn't. In fact, attention made her uncomfortable. But the messages reminded her that this story no longer belonged only to her or Duke. People had connected their own experiences to what happened. The fight had become larger than any individual. Duke lay beside the table while she read. The old Malinois seemed blissfully unaware of becoming famous. His primary concerns remained food, security, and whether the squirrel outside the apartment window represented a tactical threat. Margaret Ellis, meanwhile, was having the time of her life. The 70-year-old neighbor appeared at Serenity's door carrying a plate of homemade biscuits and enough excitement for 3 people. "You were on television." Serenity groaned. Margaret ignored her. 3 channels. Margaret. And one of them called Duke a national hero. Duke looked up at the sound of his name. Margaret pointed at him. "Don't let it go to your head." The dog stared, unimpressed. Margaret laughed. "He handles fame better than most politicians." The attention would have been overwhelming under normal circumstances. Unfortunately for Victor Kane, it was also becoming dangerous. 3 days after Ethan's article appeared, a second investigation followed. Then a third. Then a fourth. Journalists started comparing notes. Former employees began speaking anonymously. Retired contractors shared concerns they had previously ignored. Questions multiplied. Answers did not, which only increased public interest. Victor Kane attempted damage control. The strategy failed almost immediately. His company released a statement calling the allegations misleading. The statement described Duke's records as administrative inconsistencies. It claimed Kane Protective Solutions operated with complete integrity. It accused media outlets of sensationalism. Nobody seemed convinced. The problem was simple. Too many documents already existed. Too many people had started asking questions. Too many journalists were now paying attention. The situation worsened further when Ethan released a second article. This one focused entirely on the financial trail. The piece included charts, timelines, payment records, corporate relationships. None of it proved criminal conduct independently. Together, however, the information painted a deeply troubling picture. Readers noticed. Politicians noticed. Regulators noticed. Most importantly, investigators noticed. The first official response came from the State Inspector General's office in Florida. A spokesperson announced a preliminary review regarding procurement concerns connected to several municipal security contracts. The statement was brief, carefully worded, legally cautious, yet its significance was enormous. Government agencies rarely commented publicly unless they believed something justified examination. The review immediately generated more headlines. The next response arrived from the Georgia Board of Nursing. Not regarding Serenity directly. Not yet. But the board confirmed it was reviewing the circumstances surrounding complaints filed against healthcare professionals connected to public controversies. The announcement appeared harmless. Rebecca Stone recognized its importance instantly. She called Serenity that evening. "They're backing away." Serenity frowned. "Who?" "Everyone." Rebecca sounded almost satisfied. When public attention arrives, organizations suddenly become very interested in making correct decisions. The attorney wasn't wrong. Pressure had changed direction. Previously, powerful people had pressured Serenity. Now public scrutiny pressured institutions. The difference mattered. A great deal. Meanwhile, Harrison Reed remained focused on something else entirely. The retired colonel trusted publicity only so much. Attention could help. Attention could also disappear. Evidence mattered more. He spent his days speaking with former military contacts, reviewing old records, connecting timelines. Several of those conversations produced unexpected results. One former logistics officer remembered concerns involving retired K-9 transfers years earlier. Another recalled unusual documentation requests. A third provided archive correspondence referencing Duke's missing review period. Individually, the information seemed minor. Collectively, it strengthened the growing case. Harrison understood something many others missed. Corruption rarely survived exposure. But exposure alone wasn't enough. The evidence had to survive too. Late one evening, he called Rebecca. "I found another gap." The attorney immediately opened her notebook. "Where?" "Jacksonville." Rebecca sighed. Of course it was Jacksonville. Every road seemed to lead there. Harrison continued. Several security contracts were modified during the same period Duke disappeared. Silence. Then Rebecca asked the obvious question. "The same 11 months?" "Yes." Neither liked that answer. Not even slightly. Because coincidences were becoming increasingly difficult to believe. The next major development arrived on Monday. Federal investigators officially requested documentation from Kane Protective Solutions. The request wasn't public. Yet somehow the information leaked. Perhaps intentionally. Perhaps not. Either way, the effect was immediate. News organizations reported the development within hours. Investors noticed. Clients noticed. Contract partners noticed. Suddenly, Victor Kane faced questions from directions he couldn't easily control. The pressure was working, and everyone knew it. Even Natalie Quinn. The whistleblower had remained hidden since transferring her evidence. Her location was known only to a handful of trusted people. Communication occurred through secure channels. Yet despite the precautions, fear remained. Because Natalie understood exactly how dangerous the situation had become. She called Rebecca late that night. "I saw the articles." Rebecca smiled faintly. Hard not to. Natalie sounded nervous. "They're panicking." Rebecca's expression sharpened. "Who?" Silence. Then, "Everyone." The answer concerned her. Powerful people remained calm when problems could be managed. Panic appeared only when control began slipping away. Natalie continued. "Internal meetings." Pause. "Emergency calls." Pause. "Lawyers." Pause. "Damage assessments." Another pause. Then, they didn't expect this. Neither did Serenity. Neither did Duke. Yet here they were, at the center of a national story. Several days later, another significant event occurred. Veteran advocacy groups organized publicly. The response happened organically. No central leadership. No coordinated campaign. Just thousands of people reaching the same conclusion. Military working dogs deserved better. Transparency mattered. Records shouldn't disappear. By the end of the week, petitions circulated online. Former handlers gave interviews. Veterans posted photographs with dogs they had served beside. Some images were decades old, others recent. All carried the same message. Remember them. The movement surprised even Ethan Walker. The journalist had expected interest. He hadn't expected emotion. One evening, he sat reviewing comments beneath his latest article. Thousands existed. Most discussed Duke. Some discussed corruption. Many discussed loyalty. One comment in particular caught his attention. Written by a retired Special Forces soldier. Only 7 words long. We never forgot them. Don't forget us. Ethan stared at the sentence for several seconds, then copied it into his notebook. Because sometimes the shortest statements carried the greatest truth. Back in Savannah, Serenity's life remained strangely normal despite everything. She still worked hospital shifts, still bought groceries, still argued with Duke about whether squirrels required surveillance, still paid rent. Yet beneath the ordinary routine, the world continued changing. Every day brought another article, another inquiry, another investigation, another question. Momentum had become impossible to stop. One evening after work, Serenity sat on a park bench overlooking the Savannah River. Duke rested beside her. The setting sun painted the water gold. Tourists walked nearby. Cargo ships moved slowly toward distant destinations. For several minutes, neither moved. Then Serenity looked down at Duke. You know none of this was the plan, right? Duke blinked. She smiled. I was supposed to rescue you. The old dog rested his head against her leg. The gesture felt almost symbolic. Because somewhere along the way, the opposite had happened too. And as darkness settled over the river, investigations continued expanding across multiple states. More records were requested. More contracts reviewed. More questions asked. The truth was moving. Slowly. Relentlessly. And for the first time since Charleston Harbor, powerful people were beginning to realize something uncomfortable. This story was no longer theirs to control. The collapse began quietly. Most collapses do. Buildings announce themselves with noise. Storms arrive with thunder. But corruption, when it finally starts to fail, usually breaks apart in silence. One person decides to cooperate. One document appears. One investigator asks the wrong question to the wrong person. Then another. Then another. And eventually the structure can no longer support its own weight. 3 weeks after Ethan Walker's second article was published, the first major domino fell. The Florida State Inspector General's office formally announced a full investigation into procurement irregularities connected to multiple Jacksonville municipal security contracts. The announcement appeared on a Tuesday morning. By lunchtime, every major news outlet covering the story had picked it up. Victor Kane's legal team immediately issued a statement denying wrongdoing. Nobody seemed particularly interested, because by then, the public conversation had changed. The question was no longer whether something had happened. The question was how much had happened. Serenity learned about the announcement during a short break at St. Matthew Medical Center. She sat alone in the staff lounge, scrolling through updates on her phone while trying to finish a sandwich she had forgotten to eat 3 hours earlier. The television mounted in the corner displayed a news segment discussing the investigation. A photograph of Duke appeared on the screen. Then another. Then a photograph of Victor Kane. The contrast struck her immediately. One image showed a scarred military dog sitting beside a nurse. The other showed a businessman surrounded by attorneys. People instinctively knew who they trusted. Mia Patel entered the room carrying 2 coffees. She handed one to Serenity. You know your dog is more famous than most celebrities now. Serenity sighed. I wanted a quiet life. Mia sat down. Clearly Duke had other plans. The younger nurse glanced toward the television. The smile faded. They're really investigating him? Looks that way. Mia shook her head slowly. All because you refused to walk away. Serenity looked down at her coffee. No, not all because of her. Because of Harrison. Because of Rebecca. Because of Natalie. Because of Ethan. Because dozens of people had chosen to tell the truth. The realization mattered. No victory belonged to one person. Not the important ones. Meanwhile, the pressure surrounding Natalie Quinn intensified dramatically. The whistleblower had been relocated under protective arrangements coordinated through federal authorities. Her cooperation agreement remained confidential. At least officially. Unofficially, Everyone involved understood she had become one of the most important witnesses in the entire investigation. Natalie now spent her days working from secure locations while investigators reviewed thousands of documents she had preserved. She hated every minute of it. Not because she regretted helping, because she hated attention. Natalie Quinn had spent most of her life avoiding notice. At 43 years old, she still preferred spreadsheets to conversations. Her childhood had been shaped by instability. An alcoholic father, financial uncertainty, a constant need to avoid conflict. As an adult, she learned survival through caution. Keep your head down. Do your work. Avoid becoming a target. For years, that strategy had worked. Then she discovered corruption and eventually realized silence had its own price. The decision to come forward had cost her nearly everything. Yet for the first time in years, she slept without wondering whether she was helping dishonest people succeed. That mattered a great deal. The second major domino fell less than a month later. The Georgia Board of Nursing officially closed its review regarding Serenity Brooks. Not only closed it, destroyed it. The final determination stated that the complaints lacked credible supporting evidence and appeared connected to external disputes unrelated to clinical practice. Rebecca Stone personally called Serenity with the news. The attorney sounded unusually pleased, which, for Rebecca, bordered on celebration. They dismissed everything. Serenity stared. For several seconds, she couldn't respond. Months of stress. Months of uncertainty. Gone. Just like that. Rebecca continued. They also documented concerns regarding the origin of the complaints. That surprised Serenity. What does that mean? It means whoever filed them created a paper trail. Serenity smiled slowly. For the first time in a long time. A genuine smile. Not a survival smile. Not a polite smile. A real one. When she hung up, Duke immediately noticed. The old Malinois lifted his head from beneath the kitchen table. His ears tilted forward. Serenity crouched beside him. We won that one. Duke responded by pressing his head against her shoulder. It was enough. More than enough. The next victories arrived quickly. The civil lawsuit filed by Kane Protective Solutions collapsed after discovery requests forced additional disclosures. Several allegations were quietly withdrawn. Others proved unsupported. Eventually, the case disappeared entirely. No dramatic courtroom battle. No cinematic confrontation. Just paperwork. The same weapon used against Serenity. Now turning against its creators. Rebecca found the irony deeply satisfying. Victor Kane found it considerably less amusing. The businessman had aged noticeably in recent months. Photographs from public appearances showed deeper lines around his eyes. More gray in his hair. Less confidence in his posture. Investigations had a way of doing that, especially when multiple agencies became involved. Federal investigators now worked alongside state authorities. Financial analysts reviewed transactions. Contract specialists reviewed procurement records. Auditors reviewed compliance documentation. Everywhere investigators looked, they found more questions. The process moved slowly, but it moved, and eventually that was enough. One afternoon, Harrison Reed visited Savannah for the first time since Charleston. The retired colonel arrived in an old pickup truck that looked almost as stubborn as he was. Duke recognized him immediately. The old dog approached without hesitation, not enthusiastically. Duke wasn't built for enthusiasm, but with clear recognition. Harrison crouched carefully. Age had made that motion slower than it once was. The colonel scratched behind Duke's ear. The scarred Malinois tolerated the attention, which, from Duke, qualified as affection. Serenity laughed. He likes you. No. Harrison smiled faintly. He tolerates me. That's basically the same thing. Not even close. They spent most of the afternoon talking. Not about investigations. Not about contracts. Not about corruption. For several hours they simply existed as ordinary people. The conversation drifted toward old military stories. Hospital memories. Bad coffee. Terrible government furniture. The kind of things that mattered precisely because they didn't matter. Eventually Harrison grew quiet. His gaze settled on Duke. The old dog slept near the window. Sunlight touched the silver fur around his muzzle. He looks better. He is better. Harrison nodded. Yes. The word carried unexpected emotion. Because he remembered Duke before. Before the missing records. Before the warehouse. Before the neglect. Before the lies. Seeing the dog at peace felt like justice all by itself. Though more justice was still coming. Several months later, Federal authorities announced additional enforcement actions connected to the investigation. Numerous security contracts underwent review. Several were suspended pending examination. Others were terminated entirely. Public officials faced scrutiny. Consulting arrangements came under investigation. Palmetto Civic Strategies effectively ceased operations. Malcolm Voss disappeared from public view. Victor Kane's business empire began shrinking rapidly. The process wasn't dramatic. No handcuffs on television. No helicopters. No sensational press conferences. Reality rarely worked that way. Instead, contracts vanished. Clients left. Partnerships ended. Influence evaporated. The machinery supporting power slowly stopped functioning. And once it stopped, people discovered how little remained beneath it. Ethan Walker continued covering every development. His reporting earned national recognition. Several journalism organizations praised the investigation. Ethan accepted the compliments politely, then returned to work. Because stories like this never belonged to reporters. They belonged to facts. And facts required caretakers. 1 year later, spring arrived in Savannah. Warm sunlight filled the city. Flowers bloomed beneath ancient oak trees. Tourists filled the historic district. Life moved forward, as life always does. St. Matthew Medical Center remained busy. Some things never changed. Inside the emergency department, Serenity Brooks finished documenting patient notes at the end of another long shift. She looked older than she had a year earlier. Not dramatically, just honestly. Life left marks on everyone. Yet there was something else now. Peace. Not complete peace. Nobody received that. But enough. Enough to breathe easier. Enough to sleep. Enough to laugh without forcing it. Mia Patel approached carrying a chart. You staying late again? Serenity groaned. Unfortunately, your dog is waiting. Serenity smiled. That part was true. Duke had become something of an unofficial hospital celebrity. Not inside patient care areas. Hospital administrators would have suffered collective heart attacks. But among staff? Absolutely. Everyone knew Duke. Everyone greeted Duke. Several nurses kept treats hidden in lockers specifically for Duke. He pretended not to enjoy the attention. Nobody believed him. After clocking out, Serenity stepped outside into the evening air. The familiar silver Honda waited in the parking lot. And beside it sat Duke. Older. A little slower. A little grayer. Yet unmistakably himself. The old Malinois rose immediately when he saw her. His tail moved once. Just once. For Duke, that qualified as enthusiastic celebration. Serenity knelt beside him. The scar near his ear caught the fading sunlight. She placed a hand against his neck. You ready to go home? Duke leaned gently into her hand. Home. The word still felt important. Because for years Duke hadn't truly had one. Now he did. As they drove through Savannah, Serenity found herself thinking about Charleston Harbor. About the auction. About the moment Duke ran toward her. Neither of them could have imagined what would follow. Investigations. Whistleblowers. Journalists. Corruption. Lawsuits. Threats. National attention. Yet somehow all of it traced back to one simple decision. Refusing to walk away. Later that evening, Duke lay beneath the kitchen table while Serenity prepared dinner. The apartment remained small. The furniture remained inexpensive. The world remained imperfect. Yet the room felt full. Not of possessions. Of meaning. Outside, evening settled over Savannah. Inside, an old military dog rested peacefully at the feet of the woman who had refused to abandon him. The truth buried within missing records had finally reached the light. The people responsible could no longer hide behind paperwork. The lies had failed. The pressure campaigns had failed. The intimidation had failed. And Duke, the retired military dog once treated like unwanted property, had become something far greater than anyone expected. A symbol of loyalty. A symbol of courage. A symbol of the simple but stubborn belief that truth matters. Because sometimes justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. Sometimes it begins when one exhausted nurse looks at a forgotten dog and decides that neither of them will be left behind. Sometimes God's greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder from heaven or signs written across the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly through ordinary people who choose courage when fear would be easier, truth when silence would be safer, and compassion when others decide to look away. Serenity Brooks never set out to expose corruption, challenge powerful people, or become the center of a national investigation. She simply refused to abandon a forgotten military dog who needed someone to stand beside him. What began as a single act of kindness at an auction became something far greater. Hidden records were uncovered. Lies were exposed. Justice found its way into places where many believed it would never reach. And through it all, a loyal dog named Duke reminded everyone that faithfulness, courage, and love are never wasted. That is often how God works in our lives. He does not always choose the most powerful people. He does not always work through the loudest voices. Sometimes he works through ordinary men and women who simply decide to do what is right when nobody else will. A small act of kindness can change a life. One honest decision can uncover years of darkness. One moment of courage can inspire countless others to stand for truth. Most of us will never uncover a corruption scandal or become part of a national investigation. But every day we face smaller choices that matter just as much. We choose whether to help someone who is struggling, whether to speak the truth when it is uncomfortable, whether to remain faithful when life becomes difficult, and whether to show kindness when nobody is watching. Those choices may seem small, but God often uses small acts to accomplish extraordinary things. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what part of Duke's journey meant the most to you. And if you enjoy stories of faith, hope, courage, and the special bond between people and animals, don't forget to subscribe and join our community. May God bless you and your family with peace in difficult times, strength when you feel weary, wisdom when you face important decisions, and hope for every tomorrow. May His love guide your path, protect those you care about, and remind you that even in the darkest moments, He is still working behind the scenes for good.